Good morning. Ooh. Today, we examine a critical threat, China's rapid advancement in both its civilian and military space programs. We must understand what this means for U.S. national security, technological leadership, and global influence. What's happening in China's commercial and military space industry follows a similar and familiar pattern. We've seen it with semiconductors, with Huawei, with solar panels, with batteries, electric cars, and with biotech. China is following its proven playbook. It is systematically building the manufacturing and R&D infrastructure to iterate rapidly and seize dominance in space. China observers routinely talk about China's civil-military fusion. Let's be clear-eyed. China is pursuing a whole-of-nation approach to compress decades of American and European space innovation into just a few years, positioning it to leapfrog ahead. China has fueled its space ambitions through all of its familiar illegal and gray zone tactics: cyber theft, deceptive joint ventures, forced technology transfers, talent recruitment programs, academic espionage, lawfare, hostile takeovers, and strategic acquisitions that ultimately relocate technology to Chinese soil. During our recent Made in China 2025 hearing, Dr. Drew Endy warned that we have 1,000 days to not lose in biotech. The same urgency applies to space. We have no time to waste. Losing in space would mean surrendering our military advantage, economic opportunities, and the ability to set international norms. Imagine an alternative history where America didn't lead in space. It's not science fiction to say our world would look dramatically different. This, the original Sputnik moment, served as a catalyst for action. The space race with the Soviet Union defined the mid-20th century. Our competition with China in space will shape the 21st century. Since the Commission's last hearing on this topic in 2019, China's space ambitions have become achievements. Their civilian space milestones are not merely symbolic. They are calculated moves to challenge U.S. leadership. By 2030, China plans to land on the moon and return samples from Mars. By 2035, they aim to establish an operational lunar research station. By the 2040s, China plans to expand its lunar base and explore beyond Mars and Jupiter. These are not distant dreams. They are concrete steps in a strategy to cement China's position as a global space power. China's ambitions extend far beyond exploration. Their commercial space sector is booming. Once dominated by state-owned giants, China's commercial space industry expanded after 2014. The government opened the door to private investment. A new wave of companies has surged into the market. China's market has more than doubled from 2019 to $268 billion in 2023 and are estimated to get to $900 billion by 2029. China's companies are racing to deploy reusable launch rockets and mega space constellations. They aim to crowd out U.S. companies and dominate space in the near term. China is already deploying cutting-edge quantum satellites while U.S. companies trail behind. Meanwhile, China's crewed space station and ambitious lunar mission plans seek to challenge American leadership in human spaceflight as well. This is not about technological bragging rights. China's expanding space power poses real military and economic challenges. The PLA's counter space capabilities are advancing as well. Beijing's influence over the global space governance is growing too. As Carrie Bingen, a former Department of Defense leader and leading expert on space policy, recently warned, our space sector, the U.S. space sector, has long been an advantage for the United States. We need to keep that advantage. The United States cannot afford complacency. Our technological innovation, talent development, and military readiness are being tested. Today, we'll hear from General Chance Saltzman, Chief of the Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force. He will provide insights on the strategic stakes of U.S.-China competition in space, explain how the Department of Defense is preparing increasingly contested domain, and following General Saltzman, we will have a panel of experts to further explore issues related to U.S.-China competition in space. So, before I turn it to my dear friend, Commissioner Sims, let me thank the witnesses for their testimony today. Thank you to the Senate Help Committee for allowing us to use this new and renovated beautiful hearing room, and to Commissioner Sims for his shared interest in this important topic. Commissioner Sims.
Thank you, Commissioner Keiken. General Saltzman, thanks for taking the time to come down and speak with us today. The space race of the 20th century captured the imaginations and the ambitions of the American people. However, before NASA's Apollo 11 delivered one giant leap for mankind, the Soviet Union's Sputnik 1 raised fears of the capabilities that could be unleashed by United States adversaries. The question today is, Will the next Sputnik moment be made in China? Or will the United States once again lead the way in the new space race? Now, as it was then, the country who wins this race toward the stars will likely also be the country who's this century's defining power here on Earth. During my tenure in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence under the leadership of then DNI John Ratcliffe, space was made a priority intelligence domain, and Space Force was added as the 18th member of the U.S. intelligence community. That was just over 4 years ago. Earlier this year, I helped lead the transition of administrations inside one of our intelligence agencies. And as I got up to speed on various challenges and opportunities, I was struck by the progress that the People's Republic of China had made in some of the critical technologies that will define the future, including in space. China has become a peer competitor, and in some areas, the world's leader in key technologies where they were not on our level just a few short years ago. According to ODNI's annual threat assessment released last week, China has achieved world-class status in all but a few space technologies. This development has enormous geopolitical, economic, and military implications, which I look forward to discussing in today's hearing. The United States, our government, our private industry, and our people must have a sense of urgency to win Space Race 2.0, but we should also have the confidence of knowing that we have won before and we are well positioned to win again. The U.S. remains the global leader in launch capabilities. Our commercial space industry is the envy of the world. No other country is catching rockets with chopsticks so they can be sent back out into space again. The Trump administration has ambitious goals for the Golden Dome missile defense shield, whose success will demand continued innovation in space-based assets. We're going back to the moon, and God willing, we'll be the first country to plant our flag on Mars. I look forward to the testimonies from our witnesses today as we seek to retain U.S. space superiority in the 21st century.
General Saltzman, I have this long introduction about you that I will forgo reading and put in the record and turn the microphone over to you. I will note that General Saltzman is a native of Kentucky and went to Boston University. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Kuiken, Commissioner Sims, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, to all the members of the Commission. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. The space domain plays an increasingly vital role in making the modern American way of life possible. China's pursuit of its ambitions in the domain could present a powerful destabilizing force to our economy and our national security. Today, more than half of the 16 sectors of critical national infrastructure depend on satellites. A third of our crops are grown using weather data from space. Internet and cellular service relies on satellites for optimization and resiliency. Modern transportation and logistics would be impossible without the global positioning system, and the timing signal it provides serves as the basis for digital finance and e-commerce transactions. Undoubtedly, space underpins our nation's economic prosperity, but it also provides the backbone for our national security. Today's joint force is built and sized around the assumption that space will be there when needed. Setting aside the obvious examples, many of our most important weapons depend on GPS guidance to hit their targets, and the rapid collection and flow of data from space is the basis for the way we mass and maneuver fires in support of battlefield objectives. Simply put, space matters more and more every single day, and a significant amount of our capability is built, sustained, and operated by the U.S. Space Force. Unfortunately, we are not alone in recognizing the incredible strategic advantage offered by space. Over the last 2 decades, our competitors, China in particular, have invested heavily in counter-space threats, kinetic and non-kinetic weapons that can deny, degrade, or destroy our satellites. In 2007, I stood on the operations floor in the Joint Space Operations Center, Vandenberg Space Force Base, and I watched China test an anti-satellite missile for the first time. Clearly, from a military perspective, Beijing understands that the space domain is a key enabler of long-range precision strike, as well as information gathering and dissemination, which makes it foundational to the projection of national power. In the near term, China's investments in reusable launch vehicles and on-orbit refueling represent an inflection point in space access that may result in China overtaking U.S. leadership in the domain. In the face of this competition, the Space Force was established in 2019 to reshape the way the U.S. projects power in space. Armed services are unlike any other organization in federal government. They unify people, resources, and vision for one purpose: to contest and control geographic domains with military force. Their formative purpose is domain superiority, ensuring freedom of access for our forces while denying the same to our adversaries. Just as the Navy is purpose-built to secure the sea lanes, the Space Force must stand ready to gain and maintain superiority in space. In the process, the Space Force must confront a unique challenge. We are the first new military service in over 72 years, and we've had to ask ourselves fundamental questions that other services answered generations ago. Transforming the legacy thinking and processes we inherited from Air Force Space Command has been an enormous task, and I like to explain it like this. In the past, we operated like the merchant marine, and our focus was on efficiently delivering services in a benign environment. But space has become a warfighting domain, and you do not ask the merchant marine to secure the sea lanes. For that, you need a Navy. You need an organization devoted to controlling the domain so that you can access it and exploit it. You need fundamentally different equipment, operational concepts, training, everything recontextualized through the lens of military readiness. In other words, you need a Space Force. Other space agencies do incredible work, but they are not the Title X armed service entrusted with designing, developing, generating, and employing military force. We are. We have made tremendous progress over the past 5 years, but the reality is that we still have a long way to go. Last year, the PLA's budget increased by 7%, with what I determined to be stable funding and stable requirements. Meanwhile, in absolute terms, the Space Force is shrinking. Dollars appropriated are less each year since 2023. Especially with regard to our newest and most vital mission, space control, we lack the force structure we need to execute our missions in the manner of our choosing. As the Chief of Space Operations, I will tell you that my primary focus is transforming the force into a warfighting organization. This means new equipment, new training, new operational concepts, and doctrine. There is no single part of this effort that resolves the challenge. We cannot just focus on acquiring new technology. We must transform the entire enterprise. We must build the entire force and all its elements, people, and processes, because systems are useless without minds to direct them. Our Guardians are uniquely and specifically trained, educated, and experienced in space warfighting, but we have given them a heavy burden in defense of our nation. Now, while I'm speaking to you as a military service chief, the problem we face before us is not simply a military one. What is clear to me is that we must better understand as a nation the vital role that space plays in the health and welfare of our nation. And in the face of a competitor with capability to destabilize all of that, we must unify behind a whole-of-government approach that ensures the safety, security, and sustainability of the space domain. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today and share my thoughts and concerns on a topic I think will be the generational challenge of our times. And I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General Saltzman. Appreciate that opening statement. You were recently quoted as saying that China's growth in space was mind-boggling. I've spent a lot of years working alongside general officers, and I rarely hear them use terms like mind-boggling. It's usually sort of too hyperbolic. But I think you were trying to send a message with this. So in your view, just give us your sense of that. And my follow-up question to it, so you can just roll them both into the same thing, is have we made similar mind-boggling investments in space? I think your opening statement sort of answers it, but I want to give it a chance to just sort of put the two things in perspective.
Well, thank you for that. And you're right. I think that word was specifically chosen because I wanted to draw attention to the difference. And the way I would characterize it is I'm looking at a government trying to invest in capabilities for its national security, something I've been doing for almost 35 years now. And so when I see what it takes to enable the budget process, the requirements process, the working with industry, bringing in good ideas, transforming and putting those capabilities in the hands of our operators, and I see how our government does it, and then I look at what the PRC has been able to do in relatively short order, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, if you give them the full benefit of the doubt, I believe mind-boggling is a pretty good word to describe. It's been impressive. As I mentioned, looks like stable, very focused funding. It looks like their requirements and their vision has not really wavered from what they've been trying to achieve, and they've very rapidly put this capability into operational use. Compared to us, I would say that we are working through some of the policy considerations. We are working through a long-term vision. It took us a while to think through that we need a separate organization. I mentioned the PRC's ASAT test in 2007 that I got to witness firsthand. And I sometimes hearken back and think of that as really a defining moment that really put us on a path to recognize that the domain was contested and that we might need a new organizational structure to handle that. That was 2007, and it took another 12 years before we decided to put the Space Force into being. So we move a little more methodically in the U.S. government, and so that's why in comparison, I see us on a slower learning curve with regards to contesting the space domain.
That's helpful, thank you. One of the things that the national security community is always sort of pressing on is this, having the Senate ratify the UN Law of the Sea Treaty. And as I was reading your testimony, this sort of analogy came to mind, and thinking about space as the global commons in a similar way do we think about the Law of the Sea Treaty. How would you assess China treats space? Do they treat it similar to the way they treat the maritime law and maritime norms? How should we think about that problem set?
I think they're opportunistic. I think it's a good analogy. I think there is a lot about the maritime domain that we can learn from. The difference, of course, being we've had seafaring nations for millennia. And we've learned over the years through trial, through error, through accidents, through wars, what the rules of the road should be and how best to operate with a global commons that everyone can share, but also protect its own interests. And we simply have only been in the space domain thinking about it that way since 1957. You mentioned Sputnik 1. So I think we are still very early in the process of developing those rules of the road. And I think the PRC can best be characterized as taking advantage of that early domain and being opportunistic and seeing what they can get away with to some degree. And that's where I think we call on like-minded nations to talk about responsible behaviors in space, trying to set those norms so that we can call out aggressive or irresponsible behavior more specifically.
That's very helpful. One of the other areas that, when people think about space, they always think about outer space. They rarely think about all of the ground infrastructure and sort of associated supply chains that are involved in these things. How should we think about sort of ground infrastructure from our perspective, supply chain that supports it, and then how should we think about that in the case of China?
Without the ground infrastructure to support satellites, satellites are just debris. They can't do their missions if we can't talk to them, if we can't pull the data down, if we can't receive the usefulness and the advantages that they offer. It requires a ground network to do that. If you need any more evidence of that fact, look at one of the first attacks the Russians made against Ukraine. It was a ground cyber attack against the ground network of Viasat. So they had a counter space capability executed through the ground network. And so the networks, the ground infrastructure is vital. It's part and parcel with how we do the space business. We can't live without it. That's why one of our major emphasis areas is the ground network, cyber protection, cyber defense of those networks, and we have to make sure we account for it. The industrial base, the supply chains, equally critical because we are relying on our industrial base to push the technology, to push innovations. And if we don't have those solid supply chains that we can count on, that are assured, then we will suffer and fall further behind.
You actually kind of got to part of my next question, which was lessons learned from Ukraine. It sounds like one is the sort of the importance of ground infrastructure. As we sort of think about a potential Taiwan conflict or any other future conflict, how should we think about lessons learned from Russia-Ukraine?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I certainly do always list that ground attack, making sure we understand that cyber defenses and how critical the ground networks are. So I certainly count that amongst the lessons. The other big one for me, and this goes back to some comments I made in my opening statement, as a military service, I have to present an entire capability of equipment, people, processes, concepts. That's what a military force is. And one of the things I observed, and I will just say it's an observation at this point, it's hard to learn lessons in the middle of a conflict like that. But one of the lessons is if you have exquisite technology, that's necessary sometimes to be effective, but it's not sufficient. If you don't have the sustainment, if you don't have the operational concepts, if you don't have the practice of how the equipment works together with others, a combined armed approach, you're not going to be as effective. And I think we saw that in some of the Russian employment of their capabilities. They had a very capable military, but they didn't necessarily have the tail behind it, the sustainment, the operational concepts to work together to really take advantage of those technologies. Therefore, I'm very conscious of that. It's one thing to build satellites, to build the ground infrastructure, but if I'm not also training the operators, making sure that our capabilities are integrated with the broader Department of Defense, the joint force, it's not going to be as effective as it needs to be. And so those operational concepts are also high on my list of priorities.
Thank you, General Saltzman. I'll turn it over to Commissioner Sims.
Thank you, Commissioner Kuiken. General, what are some of the counter space capabilities that you are most focused on? And when I'm thinking about this question, one of the things I think that it's hard for the public to wrap their head around is, what does conflict in space even look like? And if that's where things went, God forbid, what are the implications here on Earth? So, one, help us understand what that looks like, and then second, what counter space capabilities is China developing today that you're most focused on that would have implications for that?
Thank you for that. I do feel like I spend a lot of time trying to educate people in this new domain of war. And I think the easiest way to think about it is if we can visualize or at least understand the effects that we gain advantage from space. The ability to surveil globally, whether it's weather data, whether it's intelligence information, whether we're surveilling the Earth to look for missile launches and the data that we provide. The ability to use satellites to our advantage is the reason we really want to be in space. It's to take advantage of it. And there's economic reasons with communications, et cetera. And so what war looks like is using weapons to deny an adversary access to those capabilities. So the PRC has built systems that can actually deny us the ability to use our satellites the way we want to. And so what I also describe is 6 basic categories of space weapons. And they're really divided into 2 parts. There's ground-based weapons and space-based weapons. And each of those areas has the same 3 kinds of weapons. There's directed energy, there's RF, like jammers, and then there's kinetic, and that's 2 things run together to create some sort of explosion, some sort of destructive force. So kinetic weapons, directed energy weapons, and RF jammers. Those can be on orbit, those can be on the ground pointed up. The PRC is investing heavily in all 6 categories. Right now, we are not investing in all 6 categories. We're resource limited, and we're trying to figure out which ones we could get the most utility out of early on. The reason you need all 6 categories is because they're all not best suited for all targets that you might try to hold at risk. And so we start to balance, are we trying to counter a low Earth orbit capability? Are we looking at a geosynchronous capability? Those would require different kinds of weapons. And are we trying to deny, disrupt, degrade, or God forbid, destroy? What is the end effect that's really necessary? And I'll just conclude by saying we believe in responsible counterspace, destroying something on orbit, as we've seen with the Chinese in 2007 and the Russians in 2021. The debris that's generated by a destructive force on orbit can be catastrophic for all of the users of the space domain. And so that is I feel, the last resort, and something that we don't want to create this long-lasting hazardous debris field that can start to make the domain far less sustainable.
So you said China is investing in all 6 of these categories, but we are not. What are the categories right now that the U.S. is not investing in that you feel strongly that we should be doing more in?
I won't go into too many specifics on that, but I will say our initial energy, and some of this is because of the technology readiness level in our industry, is mostly ground-based, looking up to space. So in the RF jamming environment, for example, exploring those areas. As you start to move to orbit, the technological threshold is a little higher, and so we've not put our dollars there initially. And so we are more interested right now in ground-based capabilities.
So you've done a good job kind of painting a picture of what conflict in space may look like and the different ways that could play out. With that in mind, how resilient would you assess our current space capabilities to be in response to some of China's counter space capabilities?
I start that conversation by saying that It's an important imperative that the Space Force build an architecture that denies first mover advantage. So if you'll allow me, first mover advantage is where in a given conflict, the offense has an advantage over a defensive position. And that in that condition, you're incentivized to attack first. This happens periodically in the history of warfare based on technology, whether the offense or the defense has an advantage. Right now in space, because of the way we've designed our architectures, mostly for a benign environment, orbits are very predictable, satellites don't have organic defensive capabilities, it's not hard to pick them out as targets, quite frankly. That gives the offense an advantage, that gives an incentive to strike first, and we have to try to deny that. So I think that because the systems were designed when we were more like a merchant marine, back to my analogy, we weren't thinking about combat attrition. We weren't thinking about effects of an adversary. We were thinking about what's the cheapest way to do the mission and how can we make those satellites last as long as possible. That's not a defensive posture, that's a utility posture. And so now we are actively trying to invest in changing that level of resiliency. One of the ways we're doing that is instead of using maybe 4 to 6 large, very redundant satellites in geosynchronous to perform missile warning, those 4 to 6 satellites might be easy targets to hit. But if we proliferate that mission across low Earth orbit and use hundreds of satellites to perform missile warning instead of just a few geosynchronous satellites, you change the targeting calculus for an adversary. Now they have to raise the threshold of violence in space to attack a lot of satellites to achieve that same effect on the missile warning mission. That creates a level of resiliency when you raise that threshold.
So one last question for you. I want to kind of zoom out some. I mentioned in my opening statement that I had kind of a 4-year gap in my consumption of intelligence around this, and I was struck when I came back in earlier this year by the progress that the PRC had made and some of the real critical technologies in the space domain, certainly, but across the board. I would be curious to hear your kind of big picture assessment of if the PRC continues on the trajectory that it's going in developing its capabilities, the United States continues on the trajectory that we're going in developing our space capabilities, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I don't like the curves that you've just kind of defined there. I don't like the slope of those curves. I think if in the last few years, one of the big changes that I think is noteworthy is we recognized in 2007 and in the following years after that they were investing heavily in the counter space capabilities to deny us the use of our satellites. The bigger change in the last 10 years, I think, is now they've built this, what we called a kill web. But in essence, it's a space-enabled targeting set of constellations. The ability to find, fix, track, target our terrestrial forces, that's what has grown most impressively over the last decades. Hundreds of satellites used for this purpose. So that means it's no longer, it's still necessary to protect our satellites, but that's not sufficient. Now we have to be able to deny the PRC, for example, the use of their satellites against our forces. That's a new mission set and really rounds out what we say it means to have space superiority, to use space control. Protect ours, but also deny theirs. And that's what we're trying to invest more in.
General, thank you for your testimony today. It's been very, very helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Brands.
Good morning, General. Thanks for being here. This first question is sort of an extension of the question that Commissioner Sims just asked. So it sounds like from your written and your written testimony and your answers here that you think China is fairly well advanced on its trajectory to become the world's preeminent space power, which is their ambition. Could you just sketch out in a little bit more detail what are the implications of China achieving that status for the United States in peacetime and then in conflict?
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning too that I'm still pretty satisfied with the U.S. Space Force. I want to say that, and I hope that sounds understated, because we're still an amazing military space organization. We just have a much broader set of missions than what we see the PRC focusing on. They're very clear in that they have a Western Pacific mindset. They're able to husband their resources around all the capabilities in that area. We have much more global reach, more global concerns, and so it's their focus that's allowed them to be most dangerous and so fast in putting those capabilities together. But I've also tried to be pretty clear in saying that the modern battlefield has to account for the space domain. If we can't continue to protect our use of the domain, and we can't deny an adversary, it's going to be tough to meet military objectives in any of the other domains. We are not a joint force, a multi-domain force, just because it sounds good. We're a multi-domain force because we have to be. That's what it's going to take for modern battlefield success. And I think that when we see the space domain being contested by a potential adversary, we have to be able to respond to meet them head on.
And to borrow Commissioner Kuiken's analogy, we hear and we see a lot about unsafe and unprofessional Chinese behavior in the air and the sea domains in particular. Do we observe similar things in space, and what's your perspective on that?
Nothing was more irresponsible than destroying a satellite at 500 kilometers altitude. You know, that the Fengyang satellite they destroyed in 2007, we are still tracking debris from that explosion here 18 years later. That debris causes hazards to our astronauts on the ISS. We've seen conjunctions with the ISS up 14-fold in the last 10 years. That was an incredibly irresponsible event, and I think there's large consensus that that's true. Then what we're seeing is operational demonstrations of capabilities that could also be used for purposes beyond what they state they're using them for. I'm talking about like the grappling arm, the ability to grab a satellite and pull it out of its operational orbit. This clearly has concerns for us if it was used that way. So we're watching operational tests of categories of weapons-like, weapons-class satellites, and that's concerning. The last thing I'll add is concern to the magazine depth that we call it. How many missiles are they buying? How much are they stockpiling in order to conduct these anti-satellite engagements? And again, a pretty staggering development.
You mentioned in your written testimony that the United States and Space Force in particular are constrained by essentially an outdated space policy that's based on the assumption of space as a relatively benign environment rather than the increasingly contested environment that it has become. I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that and just say what are the areas in which you think U.S. policy has become most deficient, and what would be the changes necessary to make us more competitive?
Yeah, no, I want to be clear on this too, because I don't think this is, I wouldn't characterize this as a policy debate came to the front, it was deliberately considered, and we chose the wrong policy. I don't characterize it that way. I characterize it as, to some degree, space has been a little bit out of sight, out of mind, literally, out of sight, out of mind. And so it just hasn't risen to the level where serious policy considerations need to be adjusted. We need to adjust our policies. Every time a particular policy, whether it's testing capabilities or putting resources into a particular kind of capability, when those rise to the right level, generally we can get people to acknowledge, yeah, this is probably a good idea. It's just still a low priority in terms of the policy regime to even take a look at. And so I just feel like we're lagging in the importance of establishing declaratory policy, and establishing the kind of policies we need to move fast.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Friedberg, our favorite Princeton Tiger, is beaming in from Princeton today.
Thank you very much. And General, thanks very much for your testimony. It's very informative. I wanted to ask you about how we might assess overall the balance in space. It seems that you're describing a situation in which both the United States and China are trying to secure their own ability to use space, including in wartime, and if they need to deny it to the other side. How would you assess where we and they stand in those categories? So our ability to secure space for ourselves, to deny it to them, and the same two categories for China.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm parsing my words. I'm just trying to make sure that we're careful in these oversimplifications. And the word space race gets thrown around quite a bit. And so I get asked often, tell me about the scorecard. Tell me where the balance sheet is on their side versus our side, or who's ahead in the race. And I just try to resist those because it's, as you would imagine, it's far more nuanced and far more complex than that. A race implies a very simple set of rules that everybody understands, and somebody's ahead and somebody's behind, and you cross the finish line and you can determine who the winner is. That obviously is not how you build readiness to contest a domain or continue to use a domain. It's far more nuanced than that. And so to say one person's ahead or the learning curve is faster, these are all very nuanced and to some degree overly simplistic assessments. But I understand why the question is asked. You know, if we're behind, we want to invest more. Is there things we could change if we think on balance we are not where we should be? And so I think that we are still in the midst of a transformation from developing systems that are suitable to a domain which we think will be contested in crisis or conflict, and one that we took advantage of for decades that was largely benign and immune to these sorts of activities. So we are still in the middle of that transformation. Today, we are better than we were yesterday. And my goal is that every day we continue to progress in our readiness in the development of the kind of capabilities that will be resilient when it has to perform in what is becoming a more contested and congested domain. It's about speed, it's about what you're comfortable with, and I will just tell you that my job as a service chief is really to never be comfortable. I'm continuously thinking of the worst case scenario. I'm cynical when I look at the nature of the world and how it's progressing. That's my job, is to be that kind of military planner, be ready for our worst day. So I'm not the most objective person to say where we should be or not be, but I just want to leave you with the fact that this is a complicated set of scenarios. We have to continue to invest to transform us so that our capabilities are capable, given that we know the domain is going to be contested and congested, and increasingly so going into the future.
Thank you. Let me just press down on this a little bit more. If I understood you correctly in your written testimony, you suggest that the United States is currently excessively self-constrained in its ability to develop offensive capabilities, so to deny space, if necessary, to China. Is that an accurate reading?
I think the self-constrained is because we have to make decisions based on resourcing and prioritization of those resources. And so could we reprioritize and put more money against space capabilities? Yes. So in the sense that the budget I have is the one I have to build the force with, that is a form of self-constraint. I will tell you that I believe we have more left unfunded than we have funded. I think the new missions that have been given to the Space Force, we still haven't developed the size and set of capabilities necessary to perform those new missions. As I mentioned, space control being first and foremost in those new missions that we've been given. So with new mission requires new resources. And if you don't get those new resources, then your ability to accomplish those new missions is going to be delayed as you try to put the fielded force into being.
So if we are not where we should be, in your view, with regard to our capacity to deny space to China if we needed to do so, that's more a matter of resources than policy?
I think so. Like I said, my experience is that once the policies rise to the right level and they're actually deliberated, generally the logic carries the day. But if you don't have the resources to buy the things and then request the testing, the policy issue doesn't rise to the right level.
Okay, two questions. One is, I think, a short one, and one maybe longer. We can continue. But regarding the ground-based elements of our space forces, who has the responsibility for defending those?
The short answer is everybody that owns those capabilities. That's a little too broad, probably. For instance, I have cyber forces that are required to protect the mission networks associated with my space capabilities. And so that falls to the service to do the cyber defense of its own critical networks. So each of the service has those. I won't speak for the other agencies across the U.S. government, but I think in general terms, it's if you have a network, you have to make sure that it is cyber safe, cyber compliant, in accordance with the standards set.
And finally, to the extent that you can talk about this, do you envision, or do we envision in our planning, the likelihood that a conflict in space would be protracted, that it wouldn't be over with the first and second shot, but it might go on for days, weeks, months?
I have played war games that it ends quickly and has been protracted. It kind of depends on, it's hard to separate escalation from the escalation that's occurring in the other domains. So if the particular scenario escalates rapidly on land, then it rapidly escalates in support of that in space. If it plays out more slowly, then it is protracted, and you get into a 1 versus 2 versus 3 kind of a situation. But it has the ability to play out quickly, or it could be more protracted if that was the way the other domains were escalating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Freeberg. Commissioner Miller.
General, we're very appreciative of you being here today, so thank you very much. There's a lot to be worried about in your testimony, but I think the scariest thing for me was you mentioned that while China's neck and neck with the U.S. in space planes, it's far ahead of the U.S. in quantum satellites. And you break down the trajectory since 2016 when China released its first quantum satellite, 2022, coordination with South Africa and Russia. And you end by noting that the United States has yet to launch its first quantum satellite with a Boeing-led launch plan for 2026. Why are we behind here? Is this a lack of government support? Is it a lack of policy focus? Is it a lack of public-private coordination? What do you see here, and how can we fix it?
Yeah, I'm a little bit tactical on this one, which is to say, I can tell you the realities of why we don't have more capability than we have, but I'm not sure what the root cause is behind why we don't have, and it comes back to resources. If we have the dollars to invest, to develop the technology, to put the launches together, to put the demonstrations together, to learn rapidly, to build operational capabilities, then I think we understand the kinds of shortfalls or opportunities we have that we would invest in. Without those resources, I can't obviously progress the technology. So the real question is, why do we not have the resources? And I think there's not one simple answer to that. It's a myriad of prioritization and focus and other constraints that have been placed on the budget. And so I would hesitate from my position to say why it is that the Space Force doesn't get more resources to invest in these. But I think the tactical answer is, with more resources would come more technology development faster.
And do you have one of the things that we do as a commission is recommend actions to Congress. Do you have any specific recommendation to Congress about the quantum satellite? This is something that if something is not top of mind, you're welcome to submit this to us later. But is there anything that we can direct Congress's attention to this in a way of maybe narrowing the China's advantage here?
I have to remind myself of this all the time. I think pretty near term. What is it I can do? If I get a budget tomorrow, what will I spend the money on? What's the first best thing I can do to make the Space Force more ready today than it was yesterday? But I have to fight the urge to stay in the present and think about some of the longer term visions. I think quantum is one of those examples. We have to invest in the science and technology, continue to develop things that we don't completely understand. What's the best use of it? This is going to require experimentation campaigns, a campaign of learning. These are long-term goals, and so continual investment, saying, hey, let's just, a portion of our money should be done in these S&T early development projects because we're not sure exactly how it's going to pay off. And so I have to keep reminding myself to invest in those things that have more of a long-term payoff and not get so fixated in the what can I deliver in the next year or two. And so that's how I'm doing it. But that means you have to defend something in the budget process that you can't really articulate what the payoff is going to be. That's an educational process to say, I can't tell you what the return on investment is, but I think we should continue to invest it. I think we should continue to learn here. And in tight fiscal environments, that becomes tougher to defend.
Understood. One of the areas in which you speak about the Chinese narrowing the advantage with us is reusable launch rockets. And I think your testimony notes that experts are predicting that Beijing will be competitive, or Chinese companies will be competitive with SpaceX by 2030. And you mentioned new and innovative approaches, including something that resembles a maglev train with the electromagnetic pull. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can't speak technically about those particulars. I can say that having watched the military space organizations and industry work for the last 30 plus years, The reusability of rocket launch systems has done two things. One is it's made things a lot cheaper to put on orbit, which means we can just envision, maybe it's better if we do this mission from orbit rather than try to do it in one of the other domains. That was a little bit cost prohibitive before. We have less cost prohibitions now that the cost per pound to orbit is lower. That's one. And second is that has created a market because now there are more entrants into space. The industry has expanded. That has created assembly lines and procurement lines of scale that we didn't envision decades ago. Small satellites, having a constellation of thousands of satellites is mind-boggling from where I started in this business. We thought in terms of 1 and 2 and exquisite satellites, procurement chains and economies of scale didn't exist. Now it does. I think the U.S. is taking advantage of that. We are still the world's leader in launch. As soon as those reusability capabilities start to be used in other countries, they will start to catch up and be able to use space for different missions and in different ways, even more resilient ways. If I could just, one additional thing. One of the things that sometimes we don't think about with these mega constellations is the replenishment rate. Because of the way they're designed, because of the small satellite market, the way we build them, we don't expect them to last very long. You know, we used to build satellites for 20-year lifespans. Now we're thinking more in the 5 to 7 year time frame. And while that might be a little more expensive and you have to account for the replenishment capabilities, what it offers you is a chance to refresh the technology on a much faster time cycle. We're still using technology from the 70s on orbit today to do some of our missions because it was designed, because the satellites are still lasting. So our ground architecture has to account for those legacy technologies that are still on orbit. If you're replenishing on a 5-year cycle, you can keep that technology current. And as the industry expands, you can continue to take advantage of that, especially since replenishment is so much cheaper. Those are going to be game changers globally.
I see. I don't have much time, but let me lob one last question, continuing on this relative advantage theme. You talk about GPS, and then how Beidou, which is the Chinese satellite system, was recently created, and it is what I think you say GPS capabilities are now substantially inferior to those of China's Beidou. Is that just the reality now? Is there a software fix for GPS? Do we have to build a new system? Is this a place where we should be placing our dollars versus some of these other priorities you're talking about? How do you think about GPS versus Beidou in terms of your priorities?
It's about when it was developed and for what purpose it was developed. Again, ours was developed, the basic concept was developed decades ago. We weren't thinking about benign contested environments with our GPS signal. And so the architecture is just not designed to support that. We are, as quickly as possible, trying to mitigate that with new launches. The 3F satellites are an example that are a step order, a step function better in terms of being able to operate in a contested environment. But we're still trying to re-architect that GPS architecture based on the contested domain. That's not the way it was originally designed.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Price.
Good morning, and thank you, General Saltzman. This has been so interesting. I want to go back to a question several of my fellow commissioners have asked in different ways. Each time you answer, I get a little bit more clarity in my mind on this. You specifically have talked about funding, restrictive policy, and overclassification challenges. Can you when you talk about the struggle with overly restrictive space policy and outdated ways of thinking, give me some examples.
I think a good one, you just mentioned it, is security classification. We've reached a point that I believe there is more state-of-the-world capabilities that we are protecting with classification that we used to reserve for state-of-the-art, if that makes sense. So when something is state-of-the-art, you want to protect it because you have an advantage that maybe others don't. When something is to the point where it's state-of-the-world, everybody has it. So then security classification starts to be a hurdle that you have to clear to collaborate with others. We've started the process of rewriting policy associated with our classification of space capabilities, but we're still developing it. We're still trying to figure out how you shift from classic need-to-know mindset to a more need-to-share, how do we collaborate? Sharing with industry partners, explaining them the operational challenge at a classification level that they can manage is an example.
Okay, trying to get my head around that. So go back to the role of the private space industry, working with you. The Chinese obviously have a different model. How do you see that relationship for us here in the United States, and how does it differ? How does it give the Chinese an advantage or a disadvantage?
Our acquisition process is pretty onerous in the United States for a lot of good reasons. I'll say over time, we've learned lessons, and every time we learn a lesson about either a failure in acquisition or an oversight misstep, we put documentation in place so that that doesn't happen again, and over time, that makes working through our acquisition process cumbersome. And in order to be fair and good stewards of taxpayer dollars, we have to go through a lot of process to put a contractor on contract to deliver a capability. So I'm not necessarily saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying that's what it takes to happen. If we wanted to go faster, we've started to explore authorities and different kinds of policies that middle-tier acquisition or other transactional authorities that step aside from the traditional acquisition in order to go faster. Separating software development out of what is traditionally around a hardware acquisition process is another example. We've got work to do to take full advantage of that with congressional oversight on top of it, and with the way we do resourcing to have money that we can ship between programs. I'll give you another example. When you hear industry sometimes talk about the need to fail fast. In other words, try something, it doesn't work, you shift to another approach. This is not comfortable in the U.S. government. Failure means taking the money away, not let me try something different sometimes. And so how is it that the U.S. government incentivizes failing fast? I don't know that we've figured that out exactly. That's one of those areas. It's hard to get the U.S. government to innovate. I'm trying to figure out what are the policies and incentive structures that can align to that goal.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's why we've privatized so much of this, is because they can then fail fast. You used the merchant marine analogy and also the need to for defense of our commercial industry that's in space. The industry, what kind of role are they playing in helping you think through ways that they can avoid conflict or work with you better?
Well, we wherever we can, we try to include members of industry directly in our operations. We have the commercial integration cell out at Vandenberg, where we have operators of satellite systems that are embedded with our military operators. So we have good exchange of space domain awareness data. For example, what matters, how close is too close, how do we manage the RF spectrum to avoid issues or unintentional interference? So there's good collaboration there. We invite industry partners into our war games to help us think about future concepts and what might be useful or not useful. I think it's become clear to at least the industry partners that I deal with that if a crisis occurs or a conflict occurs in space, you can't really get out of the battle zone. You can't get out of the battlefield. I like to use a picture of the Ukrainian airspace right now, and you just see a nice gap where commercial airliners avoid that airspace at all costs because it's dangerous. That's going to be hard to do when orbital mechanics are in play, and you can't really get out of the domain. You can't get out of the war zone if a war extends to space. So they're very incentivized to help us with that. And so they do that through operational concepts. For example, we feel like if we can make it harder to attack a satellite in space, then it raises the threshold where a nation might consider using an attack into space. Maneuver on orbit is one of the ways that you could create resiliency. If a satellite can maneuver away from a missile, then why would you shoot a missile at it? If you know you can't hit it because it has the ability to maneuver. Well, our satellites are not really designed to maneuver, and maneuvering is something we're very conscious about doing because there's a limited amount of fuel and you run the satellite out of gas and now its mission isn't possible. But if you can refuel those satellites on orbit, now suddenly you can maneuver with less regret, and maybe you can start to become more resilient to be able to defend yourself against an attack, and then that reduces the probability of the attack. And so we do feel like industry understands some of the operational challenges and trying to explore technologies that might help us overcome those.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Price. Commissioner Shriver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General, let me add my thanks for being here today and sharing your testimony, and thank you for your long distinguished service to our country. I am not somebody who could claim to have any expertise in space, but I've been a China watcher for a long time. And it seems to me when China gets very good at something very quickly, usually you find foreign capital, often U.S. capital, you find foreign technology, oftentimes U.S. technology, witting or unwittingly making it to China. And you find a lot of nefarious activities on the part of the Chinese, theft of intellectual property and the like. So I'm wondering if you want to sort of react to, how much we either wittingly or unwittingly contributed to this, but really more to the what we do about it. And the important question is, are there things we can do to thwart further advancement of Chinese NPLA capabilities, or have they already sort of gone past an inflection point where they've absorbed everything and they're going to indigenize everything and be good enough on their own that thwarting them is sort of beyond our capabilities?
Well, I am certainly not an expert in that area. I feel like I should be asking you questions so that I get smarter about this. I will generally say that we understand that that is what happens, and theft of our capabilities is something we take very serious. And so as we start to envision an acquisition strategy for a capability, we actually evaluate the entire supply chain. That work is done. Who's in the companies, who are the subs to those companies, where do they get their parts, where are they manufactured? All of that is evaluated to make sure that that process is assured and we don't have anything sneaking into our systems that might come from somewhere that we're not fully tracking. So I think on the supply chain side, that's already a known issue, and there's a lot of attention given to make sure that we protect ourselves in the acquisition process on that. And then secondly, you start to map out the networks that are involved in a full life cycle of a system, from its early conceptualization and the science and technology that's done, the design work, the risk reduction, all the way through building the system, fielding the system, and sustaining the system. The mapping of the networks is unbelievable, and the number of contractor networks that are connected. And obviously, that's a large cyber surface that can be exploited by a country like the PRC that has a tremendous capability. So we had to go to great lengths to try to make sure that those networks are secure, that we monitor them, that we protect them. We have cyber secure standards that we try to make sure is employed at all stages of that. But as you go down that spider web of networks, you get to contractors that we start to lose control over those networks. And so that's a concern that I think we all largely understand is out there and that we need to attend to, and we try to do as much as we can to eliminate that surface area.
Thank you for that answer. That's very helpful. Another thing, just being a longtime China watcher, it strikes me that particularly after the first Gulf War and the early 90s, the Chinese would refer to us as a technological paper tiger, and they talk about how reliant we had become on certain technologies, and space was always included in that description. And then they go and they sort of duplicate and in some cases maybe even exceed where we are in that. So it strikes me that as they develop this more complex kill chain and seek to have persistent surveillance and then ultimately link that to shooters, that they are also themselves creating vulnerabilities. Perhaps this gets into the more sensitive areas, but would you generally agree with that? Would you comment on the vulnerabilities in their kill chain as they develop and acquire these new capabilities in this domain? And are we doing enough to exploit that and take advantage of it?
This is a military conundrum that we all study. Everything you use that creates a strategic advantage can quickly become a strategic vulnerability. That's the nature of it. The more you rely on something, the more devastating it is when it's taken away from you. And so this is just about a balanced approach. When we use the word resiliency, that is what we mean. So even though we might be reliant on something, we've created the conditions where we mitigate its potential for becoming a strategic vulnerability. That is the actions behind making something resilient. So it's addictive because you want those strategic advantages, even if you recognize that there could be vulnerabilities, and you start to convince yourself that you can mitigate those because this is such a tremendous advantage. I see the PRC falling prey to that exact mindset. Hey, there's such a strategic advantage here, it's worth the risk, and now we just have to attend to the risk. And so that's not going to go away. The last thing I'll say along those lines, and again, this is that military mindset. When you see yourself being dependent on something, there is something natural that says, I don't want to be dependent on anything. I want to be able to organically do my mission without depending on anything. We are not structured to have that mindset about space. I used to say that space was kind of the icing on the cake. It just made everything a little better. But now the analogy I use, we're more like the eggs in the batter. You cannot extract it out. We are in there. The force design counts on that. So this idea of what would you do without space is like saying, what would you do without air? What would you do? It just is no longer a part of this. So that means we're fully committed to making sure we can protect against those vulnerabilities so we can continue to leverage the strategic advantage.
Thank you. I guess I have a minute left. This may not be quite sufficient for the question I'm going to ask, but I'll do it anyway. It struck me that if we had the CNO here, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Army, and we were talking about China, at some point early in the conversation, they would have mentioned partners and allies. And I don't think unless I missed it, that I've heard that. And maybe that's because, we're sort of so prominent in the space and our allies are so far behind. But wondering if you could address cooperation with partners and allies in this greater competition with China in the space domain.
The reason we haven't talked about it is because I made a gross error in not talking about it. This is important. In fact, I had 3 lines of effort when I came into the job a couple of years ago, and that third line of effort is we have to partner to win. And I meant that broadly, allies, partners, and industry, because we are not going to have the resources. We can't take on this mission as fast as we need to without using allies and partners. So when I talked about denying first mover advantage, when I talked about creating a more deterrent posture, a more resilient posture with our space capabilities, one of the elements of that is leveraging our allies and partners. And we've done that to some success, and all of those successes are breeding other successes. If a satellite is owned and operated by several countries, if the PRC wants to attack it, they have to say, I'm willing to attack 3 countries. I believe, again, that raises that threshold of concern, and they might think about it rather than it just being a U.S. only, we're in conflict with the U.S., and so I'm going to attack the one. But it also is capacity. We gain capacity without having the burden of all the cost associated with it. So cost sharing and information sharing and mission sharing is also a part of our force design. Satellite communications is a perfect example. During peacetime, we need far less communication capabilities than we do in a crisis or a conflict. Rather than buying all that I'm going to need for a conflict and hold on to that organically during peacetime, I say, no, I'm going to have this network of partners, and when we fight as a coalition, because we expect to, then I will gain their capacity as well. So I pay attention to their force design and how they're using their capabilities so that I don't buy something redundant that I don't need to. What we're trying to do is pull their concepts into our force design so we can make good fiscal decisions, but understanding that we're going to partner in conflict, we can account for those capabilities in our exercises and operations. So they're critical to our success, and we think about them all the time. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Shriver. Commissioner Stivers.
Thank you, General, for being here today. In your testimony, you described how satellite navigation is absolutely integral to battlefield operations. is my understanding that Beto's satellite system has been integrated across 1.4 billion mobile phones in 140 countries. In response to Commissioner Miller's question, you talked about the technological differences and challenges between Beto and GPS. But can you describe the threat that U.S. and our allies and partners faced from the expansion of Beto to so many countries internationally in terms of the total expansion of Beto?
It's an interesting question because it's about, it's about the narrative. It's about who are you partnering with. It's about how do you align. And if we think about this as this is the PRC narrative versus maybe more of a U.S. narrative, if there's more customers aligning that want to use Beto and they become transactionally aligned to that country, does that cause us strategic concern? I think it's a question worth answering. I don't know. I don't know that I have all the necessary information to make that assertion. But I like countries that are using the same standards as us. I like them that are building interoperable equipment to the way we're gonna use them in crisis and conflict. Those are our closest partners. And so when I see about partners aligning on the other side, it just makes me a little concerned. But I don't know enough about the actual expansion to be able to comment beyond that. But I think it's a good question to ask.
Okay, thank you. In your testimony, you called for additional resources for space control. You mentioned 6 categories, but is there a line item that you would say is the top priority? You mentioned it's difficult to shift between missions because it always takes away from something else that's important. But in terms of your justification to Congress, your budget requests, what is the top priority, and does that align with the previous budget requests?
Yeah, all of my top priorities are being addressed in some line item. There's not a huge line item that's just below the line. It's more about the resources to go faster and to develop more capacity in each of those areas. And so that's what I try to emphasize. I believe we have all of the basic categories covered. I just don't have the resources to go as fast as I think industry can go or as I think we need to go. That's number one. And then 2 is, it's one thing to have a singular demonstrated capability. It's another to have it operationalized with the capacity to actually achieve an operational effect. So speed and capacity is more the concern than any one item that's not being funded.
So it's more of just a general request for more funding for space control and not a specific category or line.
Yeah, and I'll make one caveat. Yes, sir, but I'll make one caveat to that. As I talk about the transformation from a merchant marine to a Navy, one of the things we have to be able to do, because we don't have combat experience. Thankfully, my operators don't have combat experience in space. Therefore, we practice all of our tactics on simulators. Our simulators don't currently have the level of fidelity to accurately reflect the threats that they're likely to face. And so I'm trying to rapidly increase the capacity of our modeling and simulations. So think ranges, think simulators where operators sit down and practice their tactics against a replicated threat. Pretty low fidelity right now. I'm trying to raise that game so that we can practice and understand that our tactics will work, or maybe they won't work and we need to revise them and give the operators that practice before they get into the crisis. That is one area that I think we have a lot of room to expand that we're not currently doing.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all for me.
General Saltzman, we've gone through everyone, and I think we just have a couple other questions for you, and then we'll probably give you back some time in your day. You talked about quantum, and as I was listening to you, one of the former commissioners always talk about how this commission sort of tries to look over the horizon and think about issues that are in that long term that you were talking about. Quantum communications is one of them. That was the only one you sort of highlighted. Are there other areas where we should sort of, sort of weird to say over the horizon when we're talking about space, but look over the horizon in terms of technological development, capabilities, et cetera?
So let me not answer your question, but maybe offer something that I'm kind of hoping will help in the long run. I'm trying to stand up Futures Command. And the reason I need a Futures Command is because I'm not sure exactly what 2040 and beyond looks like. I'm not exactly sure what the threat environment looks like. I'm not exactly sure which technologies will be used against me, which technologies I might be able to take advantage of for operational use. And I need a focused group that is able to both just do the thinking that's necessary, to leverage industry, to leverage our science and technology community, to leverage the interagency. What's NASA working on? What are some of the other civil sectors? NOAA, what are they working on that's been useful? And pull that together and truly describe in real detail what that future operating environment looks like. That then, I believe, will allow me to create a specific demand signal back to industry, back to the science and technology community and say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and these are the technologies that we think need to be rapidly developed. And so while I can't sit here and say, this is a technology that I think we really got to invest in, what I'm trying to do is build a more fulsome process by which we will routinely identify what those technologies are and make sure there's a very objective demand signal back to the people that can deliver them.
That's really helpful, thank you. Your merchant marine navy analogy has really sort of stuck with me here. And as I was thinking about it, one of the things I remember when I was still with Leader Schumer was just how many entities across the federal government have roles to play in space. You know, NOAA has roles, NASA has roles, you obviously have roles, the intelligence community as well. In your opening statement, you talked about sort of this whole-of-nation approach that China takes. We haven't really looked at the sort of civ-mil fusion or lack of fusion in the U.S. government or how we're organized with respect to space. Are there any ideas that we should sort of think about in that area to, you know, maybe revitalize the way that we are organized as it relates to space?
I think, you know, this, one of the things that we're trying to do, and I mentioned Futures Command, looking at what are the missions that we're going to be asked to perform as technology is changing, as we can move different missions from maybe what was done in the airborne environment to what could be done in the spaceborne environment. There's going to be a roles and missions discussion. We've kind of evolved the roles and missions between military space and IC space, civil space, R&D space that NASA kind of focuses on. We've evolved to that point, but I don't know if based on the new security environment, we've really crystallized who's responsible for what and defined that in terms that we can say, because I'm responsible for this, these are the resources I'm going to need. We're kind of backing into it to some degree. And so a level of formalization of those responsibilities is probably the next step. Okay, we stood up an organization for military space. Now we need to clearly define what those roles and responsibilities are, or even establish a process by which we will evaluate new missions as they're developed to make sure we give them to the right organization.
That's helpful. And then Commissioner Shriver got me thinking about international institutions. The only one I could think of off the top of my head was ITU. And then the only treaty I can think of is the Space Treaty. How should we think about this ecosystem if China has little regard for these institutions or sort of historic legal documents?
Yeah, you know, those are the two that always, those are in the forefront. I'm sure there are others that are behind that, but I think this goes to the point where we're still maturing the community of practice, the community of interest internationally that's going to address the challenges that come up in the space domain. So I think that it's just recognizing that we have work to do, that we have to document these approaches is key. Do we need an international group to do it? Maybe. You mentioned the PRC doesn't really follow those, but that doesn't mean they can ignore them. And sometimes the most important thing you can do to attribute aggressive, irresponsible behavior is define what responsible behavior looks like. Then it becomes clear that somebody has violated it. And even if they are willfully violating it, at least the international community can comment on it from the same basic standard that's been established by like-minded spacefaring nations. And if that number is 190, and there are two people outside of that, well, two nations outside of that, well, then that says something. And I think that gives us the power across the international community to apply additional pressure when somebody specifically acts irresponsible based on the defined responsible behaviors.
Thank you. Commissioner Sims?
Thank you, Commissioner Kuiken. You know, I was thinking, General, as you were talking about the need to increase the fidelity of your training platforms, that, you know, we may lose a lot of things to the Chinese, but if we lose at video games, I don't even know what we're doing at this point. America's not losing at video games, Commissioner Stivers. It's not going to happen. I remember in the first term of the Trump administration, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval, where the president was meeting with the NASA administrator and pressing him on going to Mars. Like really getting after it, like, man, we got to go. And I think we've made a lot of progress certainly in that since then, and it's starting to feel a little more within reach. What are the implications of the race to Mars for some of the things that we're talking about today?
If I understand the basic concept, having just looked at it as an amateur, seriously, the launch infrastructure that's going to be required to put vessels headed towards Mars at the right tempo to sustain the effort there is pretty impressive. It's going to be a large effort. Our current launch infrastructure is being stressed to capacity. I did a little basic research, which means I Googled it. You know, how many launches did the USG execute in 2010? So 15 years ago. It feels like yesterday for some of us. There was only about 15 launches. 14 came out of Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Complex. 14 launches. This year we're going to do almost 100. I think 93 is scheduled. 7, 8 times as many launches. Same infrastructure, same basic infrastructure, same basic manning levels to support. It's time to revisit the launch infrastructure as we think about what it would take to actually go to the next level of space exploration, space utilities, how much we're going to put on orbit for national security. We've got to build and commit to an infrastructure to support that. It's not always the fun stuff. Nobody likes to do foundation work when they just want to remodel the kitchen, but that is critical work that has to be done, and it's not going to be cheap. But these are big rockets that are going to require new space launch complexes to make sure we can handle it.
One last question I had for you. You've gotten into so much today that's been incredible, so thank you again for your testimony. If you had one message for the American people about this topic, and then related to that, if you had one message for Congress about this topic, what would those be?
What I always try to educate the general public on is they don't recognize how much space capabilities affect their everyday lives. It's why I started my kind of oral statement by saying your online banking, your Amazon shopping, paying for gas at the pump, your direct deposit into your bank account, not to mention Google Maps getting you to the store, the fact that the food was put in the store because farmers are able to use GPS and weather data to grow crops. I mean, it's so integrated into our American way of life that I want them to understand that if we don't have those space capabilities, generally the way you live your life will change very dramatically. And because of that, we have to have an organization that protects those capabilities out there. So that's what the Space Force does. It protects the American way of life, and it just sounds so, throw the cape over the shoulder kind, but I believe it. There's so much about it that's important, and we have to protect it. And then what I would say to Congress is, once they recognize that, which I think they generally do, I just ask why the Space Force is shrinking in size. That's a disconnect that's really hard to square. How much more important space is becoming, how much more we feel like our national interests require us to defend, and then why is the Space Force shrinking?
Thank you.
Commissioner Freeberg, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. General, I wanted to come back to this question of self-restraint and make sure that I understand what you mean. In your testimony, you say we continue to struggle with overly restrictive space policy, and you go on to say we restrain ourselves from doing what is needful to avoid creating improper perceptions of weaponizing space. Could you be a little more specific about what it is that we're restraining ourselves from doing that you think we ought to do?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just the way we talk about space as a warfighting domain. I've tried to be as maybe provocative as possible just in the testimony today. I'm not afraid to say offensive capabilities. I'm not afraid to say defensive capabilities. I'm not afraid to say disrupt, deny, degrade. But I'm conscious of the fact that 10 years ago, I would have been in serious trouble with my bosses, with Congress, with the media would not understand that. It is a radically different environment now because we recognize how critical it is and we recognize what our adversaries are doing to try to deny us those strategic advantages. And as a military service, I think it's understood that my job is to figure out how to use military force to protect our interests. Without the Space Force, you don't have those kind of conversations. You have the oblique conversations. It's important to us. We'll take all prudent actions to protect our interests. We talked in parables to some degree about protecting and defending our space interests. I think that's changed in the narrative, but our policies haven't all caught up with it. So the ability to one industry partner to talk to another industry partner at a classification level that both can be in the same room, we haven't caught up with that yet. Our ability to perform on-orbit testing or on-orbit tactics validation hasn't caught up with it yet. We still have to go to very high levels of approval to do some of the basic things that you would think are just normal operations, testing, tactics development, training. We do that all in simulation, not in actual live practice. We don't practice on live assets very often because of policies that are in place. And I just think we can, as we start to change the narrative around dealing with a contested domain, we just need to catch up all of the policies so that they're consistent. And this is not to say that we're not catching them up. It's just about work that we have to do.
Commissioner Shriver asked you a question about U.S. cooperation with allies with regards to operations in space. I wanted to ask you if you could comment on cooperation between China and Russia. Russia is, of course, one of the original spacefaring nations. Does it still have something useful to offer China? To what extent are those two countries cooperating in peacetime? Is there any suggestion that they might cooperate in wartime?
Yeah. Again, I'm paid to think of the worst case scenarios, and so I always think about what if our two most capable potential adversaries are teaming together, and it's not a pretty picture. I don't think that's something that anybody would choose to be on the opposite side of that war game. It just creates complications. So yes, I do think it's possible that they'll collaborate. I do think that the PRC has developed such a need for space capabilities that the idea of irresponsible behavior by anybody else is starting to affect the way they see the space domain as well. Used to be that you would argue that only the US really took full advantage of space and others didn't need it as much, so it became a vulnerability. Now I think the PRC, for example, certainly needs to use the space capabilities to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And the idea of a destructive satellite, they did not like the 2021 ASAT test by the Russians either. This is irresponsible behavior, and I think they see that it could potentially jeopardize the way they want to use space. So I do think there's a balancing there between the two, but my job is to think about the worst case scenario, and that's where they collude to work against our national interests.
And are there capabilities that Russia has developed over the years that China doesn't yet have, which would be useful to China?
I don't know if there's any capabilities that the PRC hasn't developed. The Russian nesting doll, that was our explanation for the satellite that released a kinetic kill vehicle. That's an interesting technology that's very hard for us to track because of the size, because of when it occurs, the flexibility of it. So that's a Russian capability that we pay very close attention to. We think it's very destabilizing. Our space domain awareness capabilities are still maturing to the point where we can avoid that kind of operational surprise. So those are capabilities that I have to pay close attention to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Friedberg. Commissioner Stivers.
Commissioner Friedberg stole my question on Russia, but I'd like to focus a little bit more on that. Has China particularly provided space technology or operative support to Russia in the war in Ukraine?
I don't have any details on that.
Okay.
Just don't.
Okay.
General Saltzman, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate your testimony. Your staff was excellent to work with in setting this up, so really appreciate that as well. And we look forward to staying in touch.
Great. Thank you very much.
Our next panel today will examine a broad range of issues, including China's military space capabilities, civilian space activities, and commercial space industry, and implications for the United States in the ongoing space competition. We'll start with Dr. Brien Alkire, Senior Operations Researcher at RAND Corporation. Dr. Alkire will analyze China's space capabilities that challenge U.S. space sovereignty. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Blaine Curcio, founder of Orbital Gateway Consulting. Mr. Curcio will provide an overview of China's commercial space industry growth and evaluate its domestic and international policies shaping the future of its commercial space sector. After that, we'll hear from Ms. Victoria Samson, Chief Director of Space Security and Stability at the Secure World Foundation. Ms. Samson will discuss China's efforts to strengthen space cooperation with other countries, as well as its positions on space governance in multilateral forum. Then we'll welcome Mr. David Cavossa, President of the Commercial Space Federation. Mr. Cavossa will assess how the U.S. commercial space sectors are performing in relation to China. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Andrew Cox, President of Fourspoke. Mr. Cox will assess China's rapid space advancements and what it means for U.S. national security. Thank you all very much for your testimony today. The Commission is looking forward to your remarks. I ask that you all keep your remarks to 7 minutes. And Dr. Alkire, we will begin with you.
Commissioner Kuiken, Commissioner Sims, other members of the Commission, thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in the panel today. China's leaders see preeminence in space as an important component of a strong country, a source of national pride, and key to a prosperous nation. People's Liberation Army writings from 2013 described space capabilities as strategically important for winning what they call informatized wars. And since that time, China has designated space as a warfighting domain, evolved its organization for space warfighting twice, and grown its space and counterspace capabilities at what General Whiting called a breathtaking pace. In the past 8 years, China has increased the number of satellites for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance by a factor of 6, which includes a 17-fold increase in the number of commercial satellites for that mission. China is the only country to operate a synthetic aperture radar satellite in geostationary orbit, which provides China with a persistent day-night all-weather capability to surveil large naval units transiting the Indo-Pacific region. China has also increased its number of communication satellites by a factor of 12, including the recent launch of 72 Project SatNet satellites into what will eventually be thousands of satellites to function as China's Starlink. China has expanded its launch industry and accelerated its launch pace, and is prioritizing a tactically responsive space launch capability that leverages several of its new mobile solid-fueled vehicles provided by a combination of China's established state-owned enterprise space companies as well as newer entrants, albeit with several launch failures for those newer entrants. China has made similar progress in other space mission areas, and like the U.S., China is working to field space architectures that leverage resilience methods, such as the proliferation method associated with U.S. Starlink and Chinese Project SatNet. With regards to counterspace, China has an operational direct descent anti-satellite missile system for low Earth orbit that the PLA trains to operate, and China likely has efforts underway to field a similar capability for the higher orbits. According to the Defense Intelligence Agency, China has ground-based laser weapon systems and a wide range of electronic warfare capabilities. China also has increased capability for on-orbit inspection and repair satellites in low Earth orbit and in geostationary orbit that have demonstrated complex maneuvers, and those capabilities could have dual use for counter-space operations. For instance, a repair satellite that is equipped with a robotic arm could be used to deliver irreversible attacks on satellites by permanently damaging their components, or reversibly attack satellites by reorienting the satellite and temporarily taking it off of its mission. And conceivably, this kind of satellite could also be used for defense against similar attacks. Hence, China potentially has a wide range of counter space or dual-use capabilities that can flexibly be used for offense or defense with reversible or non-reversible modes of attack spanning multiple orbital regimes. This provides the People's Liberation Army commanders with flexible tools for crisis and escalation management. So why is China fielding these types of counter space capabilities? It's fielding them because it perceives the U.S. as having high dependence on space for joint warfighting. But interestingly, there's growing evidence that China itself has growing dependence on space capabilities for joint warfighting, which is evident by the rapid increases in the space capabilities that we've seen. China depends on space capabilities to monitor the U.S. posture in the Indo-Pacific region. At a time of war, China would depend upon space for targeting with its missile capabilities and assessing damage of those attacks. China likely depends on space to enable a broad range of long-range fire capabilities in multiple domains. China may have less incentive to escalate warfare to space if the People's Liberation Army needs to preserve the space capabilities that it depends upon for its joint warfighting, and if the People's Liberation Army believes the United States can hold those capabilities at risk. I make 3 observations about how the U.S. should respond to these developments. First, this panel is about China's ambitions to dominate space. I think space dominance narrowly focuses attention on threats to satellites. I think the U.S. should take a broader approach that holistically considers threats, but also includes careful consideration for U.S. and Chinese dependencies on space for joint warfighting. What are the key dependencies that each side depends upon, and when during the conflict? Are there alternatives in other domains? What are the battlefield effects, and what are the expected responses of holding Chinese satellites at risk? The U.S. should seek to preserve the space capabilities it relies upon for the joint warfight, and to hold at risk the space capabilities that China relies upon to achieve its military objectives. Second, systems that increase U.S. resilience challenge the People's Liberation Army's preferred approach to warfighting. The United States should continue to acquire space architectures or services from commercial space architectures that leverage methods of enhancing resilience, including proliferation and diversity methods. For instance, the U.S. should enhance the resilience of architectures to provide positioning, navigation, and timing services. Third and finally, I recommend equipping U.S. military commanders with capabilities that can be used to defend satellites that lack adequate resilience measures and flexibly hold at risk the capabilities that China is highly dependent upon for joint warfighting. The U.S. is going to need robust capabilities for space domain awareness and command and control, since they are foundational for space operations, and indeed those appear to be priorities today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alkire. Mr. Curcio?
Thank you very much to the Commission for the invitation. I'm very proud and honored to be here. So today I'm going to talk about 3 main topics. So the technology transfer and alignment of incentives across the entire government across the entire government in China with regard to the commercial space sector, how this has impacted talent development and the proliferation of talent across the space sector, and finally, how national government policies are broadening the playing field where commercial companies are allowed to act within the Chinese commercial space sector. So looking at technology transfer and the alignment of incentives across the whole of government, I'd like to give an example of the Changchun Institute of Optics and Precision Mechanics in China's northeast Rust Belt area of Changchun, Jilin province, and Changchun city specifically. There's a company, Changguang Satellite Technology Limited, CGSTL. They are arguably the leading remote sensing company in the world. They've built and launched about 200 remote sensing satellites over the past 10 years. They operate a constellation of those satellites. They've had some interesting adventures with the Wagner Group, among other things, that have gotten them sanctioned. This company emerged from this Institute of Optics and Precision Mechanics. This Institute of Optics and Precision Mechanics has, they have a venture capital arm that has invested into this company and also invested into a number of other related companies, companies building optical payloads, companies building filters for these satellites, companies building a lot of other related equipment. And again, this institute, which is allowing their technology to be transferred to commercial companies, is investing into these commercial companies. It's also being supported by the province and the city of Changchun. So you have the incentives of the provincial government, the city government, the large Chinese Academy of Sciences institute within this city, all aligned in trying to help this local company build remote sensing satellites and other related equipment. And this is something that we've seen in other parts of China. Harbin, there's the Harbin Institute of Technology, arguably the probably third or fourth top university in China. They built the robotic arm on the Chinese space station, for example. They have similar spin-offs that they've invested into, and this is creating a very clear alignment of incentives across large parts of the subnational government. And this has impacted talent transfer because it's made it clear to typically young entrepreneurial engineers or others that it's okay to make a commercial space company. And so the second point, we've seen a dramatic change in the way that talent has been transferred from the state to the private sector. So if we think about 10, 11 years ago, 2014, Document 60, let's say the starting point for commercial space in China, anyone in China at that time who knew how to build a rocket was working for a state-owned enterprise building rockets, right? And there was an example in 2018, the first notable example of a commercial launch company, Land Space at the time, hiring a senior launch engineer, Zhang Xiaoping, from the Xi'an Space Propulsion Research Institute. And at that time, the Xi'an Space Propulsion Research Institute, they were not amused at this. They tried to sue Land Space. They tried to sue Zhang Xiaoping. They said, quote, Zhang was most crucial to the development process and had irreplaceable talents, and argued that his departure could affect China's race to send people to the moon. At the time, the rumor in China is that this decision of whether Zhang was allowed to go to a commercial company went all the way up to President Xi Jinping, who, again, rumored said, as long as he stays in China, he can do what he wants. Now, Zhang Xiaoping, as far as I know, is still working for Land Space, so he was not prohibited from making that move. But again, it was a big deal. There were a lot of articles written about it. If we fast forward to today, there was an article a couple of weeks ago talking about which Chinese commercial launch company is the, quote, Whampoa Academy of the Chinese space sector. Whampoa Academy being an academy where a lot of early leadership from the PRC and ROC was trained. And a couple of examples that this article mentioned, you have Xu Chang, the founder of OneSpace, was originally on the founding team at Landspace. Kang Yonglai, the former CTO of Landspace, went on to found Space Pioneer. In 2024, Ge Minghe resigned from Landspace to establish his own company, Xiandeng Aerospace. Huo Liang, who founded Deep Blue Aerospace, was an early employee at OneSpace. Chen Xiaojun, former CTO of OneSpace, left the company to establish his own company. You get the point. The idea that top talent is no longer necessarily forced to stay within state-owned enterprises, and this has created a much larger pool and a much more diverse pool of people who are allowed to a certain extent, do what they want, as long as they stay in China, as the case may be. In any case, the talent and the evolution of that talent has changed dramatically over the last 10 years, and that's it's a notable change. The last point I would mention is that the central government has expanded the field where commercial space is allowed to play. So China typically is a system where companies need to ask for permission rather than asking for forgiveness. So commercial space companies really don't act unless the government tells them you're allowed to do this thing. And if we think about an example like the, quote, Chinese version of Starlink, for a long time, no one really knew what that was going to look like. In 2020, the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, they added satellite internet to their list of new infrastructures, which is a list including things like industrial IoT and 5G and other digital infrastructures. That was the first sign that satellite internet was a big priority in China. But still, commercial companies really weren't allowed to enter this field because it was still pretty nebulous. In 2021, there was the establishment of China SatNet, which Brien referred to earlier. And SatNet is a fully state-owned enterprise. And it was implied that only state-owned enterprises were going to do this. But for a couple of years, for a lot of different reasons, SatNet did not make a lot of progress. And so in 2023, we saw the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology publish a report or a publication about the opening up of the satellite internet sector, which called for the, quote, coordinated opening of the telecommunications business to private capital and, quote, to promote the reform of the satellite internet business in steps and stages. This occurred in October of 2023. Within about 6 weeks, a second Chinese version of Starlink, this company Shanghai Space Sail, raised about $1 billion US. They have since launched 90 satellites into low Earth orbit for communications, and this company is It's effectively a joint venture between the Shanghai government and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, but still, it's not a national government company. It's a nominally commercial company. And the point being, until the national government made this proclamation, that was not going to be allowed. And so the government has made this, this progressively widened the playing field for what commercial companies are allowed to do. And just the last couple of points, and this is extended now to cargo spacecraft, where we're seeing more national government support for that. It's expanded to other areas as well. So I'm over my time. I will stop there, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Samson.
Thank you. Hearing Chair Price, Commission members, and Commission staff, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My testimony will focus on China's space diplomacy. One must first understand the way the United Nations divides space. Civil space topics are discussed in Vienna, Austria, at the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or COPUOS. Space security topics are discussed at the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, Switzerland. China participates in statements at COPUOS that are titled the G77 in China. This group promotes technology transfer and ensuring that developing countries are not left behind in the use of space. It calls for equitable access to space, particularly low Earth orbit, regarding concerns about Western very large constellations, despite China having started launching 2 very large constellations of its own. Overall, China has a fairly consistent approach to COPUOS. It recognizes the importance of and need for space governance and works to see that its domestic activities meet international norms. As for space security, China and Russia argue that weapons placed in space pose the biggest threat and have proposed a weak and unverifiable treaty banning them, while the United States believes it is irresponsible actions and wants internationally recognized norms of responsible behavior to mitigate them. Most developing countries have tended to side with the Chinese and Russian position. China and Russia consistently cite the United States calling space a warfighting domain as evidence that it is preparing for space war. While China and Russia frequently have similar positions in multilateral space security fora, they do occasionally diverge. Last year, reports emerged that Russia is developing a nuclear warhead that could be placed in orbit, which directly contradicts the Outer Space Treaty. In April 2024, the UN Security Council voted on a resolution on weapons of mass destruction in space, which affirmed obligations to the Outer Space Treaty. The resolution was vetoed by Russia. China abstained. When this resurfaced later as a UN General Assembly resolution, it overwhelmingly passed. Again, Russia voted no, while China abstained. There is another place where China and Russia have not been in lockstep. Russia pledged in 2004 it would not be the first to place weapons in space. In 2014, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution which encouraged all states to make this commitment. This has been followed annually by similar resolutions. China has voted yes on this resolution every year and, with the exception of 2021, has also been a co-sponsor. However, it has not made this pledge. Other issues shape China's approach to diplomacy and outreach: space resources and exploration, and counter space capabilities. China believes the Outer Space Treaty is a cornerstone of legal framework on space resources and wants COPUOS to aim for unified interpretation and applications of it. China does not oppose commercial missions, but wants to make sure that they do not negatively impact scientific ones. The International Lunar Research Station is a Chinese-Russian initiative whose goal is the operation of a research station by the moon's south pole by 2035. 13 states have agreed to participate in it. The United States has its Artemis Accords, which build on principles contained in the Outer Space Treaty and apply them to lunar space activities. 53 countries have signed on to the Artemis Accords. These lunar governance frameworks can be competing or complementary, depending on how relations between the United States and China evolve and how the separate lunar programs fare. When talking about China's counter space capabilities, much is this derived from Secure World Foundation's unclassified annual report that I edit, Global Counter Space Capabilities and Open Source Assessment, the 2025 version of which was released today. China has engaged in multiple tests of technologies and capabilities that either are offensive counter space weapons or could be used as such. That said, it is unclear whether China intends to use its counter space capabilities in a future conflict or whether the goal is to deter U.S. aggression. There is no confirmed public evidence of China using counter space capabilities in current military operations. One of the questions I was given was how to balance keeping the United States' technical edge while engaging with China. The United States is in the process of hollowing out its current scientific base by cutting funds for scientific research under the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency efforts. This is hobbling the United States' technological edge, and if continued, will have consequences for the United States' scientific and technical base for decades. This disruption of federal funds to the U.S. scientific research community will harm U.S. innovation and competitiveness. There is a reason why the United States opted post-World War II to pour money into research. This was a way to ensure that the United States kept its competitive edge against Cold War rivals. By upending this, the United States is opening itself up to being bypassed by institutions supported with more stable funding sources, such as those being funded by the Chinese government. The same thing is happening with NASA. There is a lack of clarity about policies and programs, loss of personnel, and disarray caused by reported plans to move NASA headquarters and distribute staff to other NASA research centers. Federal grants have also been pulled back from existing NASA programs. This weakens the U.S. civil space program, as this level of uncertainty challenges NASA's mission focus. Again, this leaves an opening for China's space program to take advantage of its predictable operating environment to leapfrog the United States. There are opportunities for constructive space engagement with China on overlapping challenges. One is lunar radio communications for position navigation and timing, whose signals are fundamental for orbiting, landing, and surface operations. Engagements with China to avoid interference with each other's signals is crucial for mission assurance. As U.S. satellite operators deploy and operate their constellation, the risk of potential collisions with Chinese operators is growing. Bilateral sharing of information and coordination for operational safety is limited. On the Moon, coordination channels will be needed to mitigate concerns about human safety issues, understanding of intent, and shared hazards of lunar dust. There is one serious speed bump in the way of U.S.-China bilateral space cooperation, the Wolf Amendment. Although there is little evidence that it has affected China's domestic polities, it has given Chinese officials a pretext to deflect criticisms about its lack of engagement onto the United States. The United States has long been concerned about China's space programs. There are geopolitical issues, but China is a major space actor and cannot be ignored. While recognizing that China is a competitor, the United States can still benefit from finding ways to engage with China to maintain space stability and to promote responsible behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cavossa.
Thank you, Commissioner Kuiken, Commissioner Sims. My name is David Cavossa, and I am the president of the Commercial Space Federation, or CSF. CSF is the leading U.S.-based trade association representing commercial space. Our members represent multiple sectors of the space economy, including launch and reentry, remote sensing, spaceports, satellite comms, in-space awareness and manufacturing, commercial space stations, space situational awareness, and many more. When we talk about the space race of the 21st century, it's very different, as was noted by General Saltzman, as the previous space race with the Russians earlier. There is no one destination to win and no finish line. This must be a long-term, sustained expansion of human activity into space. It is critical for national security, economic security, and soft power diplomacy. So how are we doing in this race vis-a-vis China? The U.S. is still the global leader in space today, but the People's Republic of China is executing on their stated goal to catch up and overtake the U.S. by 2050. As I heard Commissioner Kuiken mention in his opening comments, China's ambitions have become their accomplishments in the last several years. So how is China going to do this and overtake the United States? They're going to do it by taking advantage of an uneven playing field and not necessarily play by the same rules that we govern ourselves by. It's important to note there is no Office of Management and Budget, no Congress or appropriations process that China has to deal with today, especially their commercial industry or civil industry. The PRC funds what the PRC wants to fund, and today that is space. Furthermore, the PRC has shown little respect for the environment, public safety, and space sustainability, or intellectual property for that matter. There are no independent regulators limiting the PRC or their commercial industry on what they can and can't do right now in space. A key component of China's space ambitions is building up its domestic, state-owned, and commercial space industry. Before 2014, space activity in China was only a state-owned enterprise. 10 years ago, the PRC opened the aperture and called for private investment in areas such as launch and satellite manufacturing. In just 10 years, China has made tremendous progress in doing what they said they were going to do back in 2014. There are now multiple non-government space launch enterprises in China, as has been noted, with 6 new reusable launch vehicles or rockets planned for maiden launches in 2025. China has also made significant investments in launch infrastructure, including the construction of 2 new launch pads over just the past 2 years. On the satellite side, China is accelerating the build-out of 2 LEO broadband constellations, as noted. China has constructed at least 7 new satellite manufacturing facilities in recent years, with the capability to produce thousands of satellites annually. By the end of 2024, China's filings at the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU, indicate plans for more than 150,000 satellites. It's important to note that China's expansion into LEO has not been done with consideration for principles like space sustainability. In the last 20 years, China has launched more rocket body mass into low Earth orbit that will not adhere to the 25-year disposal rule than the rest of the world combined. So our recommendations from the commercial space industry. I think we'll continue to lead as long as we thoughtfully implement policies that unleash the innovation of the commercial space sector. We suggest that the United States government set space as a national priority. The United States has recognized the value of investing in and unleashing industries of the future like AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing in order to maintain America's competitive edge. The space sector is that next critical industry of the future and in need of comprehensive U.S.-focused policy. Number 2, the U.S. should continue to buy commercial solutions to the maximum practical extent, whether that be NASA, NOAA, the Department of Defense, Space Force, or any civilian or federal government agency. Number 3, the United States needs to continue to invest in civil space programs and NASA in its budget. NASA and Congress needs to commit to sufficient funding for civil space exploration, space science, and a continued presence going after low Earth orbit, the moon, and exploration of Mars. We need to commit to the ISS transition. NASA should aggressively move out on awarding and funding new commercial LEO space stations and allowing the U.S. to maintain a presence in low Earth orbit. We must invest in spaceport infrastructure resiliency. The administration and Congress should make robust investments in spaceport infrastructure to increase U.S. access to space from multiple different locations across the United States. And we need to streamline and waive the regulatory requirements impeding that progress and that construction. Number 6, the U.S. should accelerate launch licensing reform. The Department of Transportation today, through the FAA, is the licensee for all space launch and reentry activity. And as the cadence for launch continues to increase, the licensing process has not kept up, and we need to reform. Number 7, we need to modernize remote sensing licensing reform. As noted earlier in this panel, China is moving very quickly on commercial remote sensing, and we need to keep pace here in the United States. Number 8, we need to implement a mission authorization regime that allows the Department of Commerce to immediately start licensing missions that are not already licensed by other federal regulators today. And we need to, number 9, maintain our leadership in international fora. In conclusion, the furthest humans have traveled into space since 1972 was last year on a privately funded, privately crewed expedition called Polaris Dawn. The United States commercial space industry has the innovation and the talent to maintain America's leadership in space and dominance in technology. We just need a willing partnership from the U.S. government. I thank the Commission for your attention and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Cox.
I want to thank the Commission for the opportunity to speak today. There is little doubt that China has a strategic intent to develop a robust space presence that competes with the West in all areas. There is also little doubt that China intends to hold our eroding space advantages at risk with sophisticated weapons that range from jammers that can deny virtually every part of the spectrum, on-orbit weapons that they routinely test, and direct ascent weapons that have been recklessly employed at multiple orbits and altitudes. For over 2 decades, I was part of the policy discussions, budget plans, and architecture pivots to prepare the U.S. for a contested space environment with a peer adversary like China. While our pace to address the threat is lackluster, it isn't because of a lack of leadership awareness. It is more attributable to endless policy debates that rehash old decisions, failed acquisitions, budget uncertainty, and traditional government infighting. While fixing these challenges in the DoD and the IC is important, their repair will still fail to enable the United States to compete with China in space. The reason? China is executing a much broader strategy that involves all the mechanisms of national power and a well-synchronized effort to attain global dominance. While industry innovation on the U.S. side is better than China, Chinese government innovation is greater than ours. The U.S. efforts are not well synchronized and sometimes even work at cross purposes. In short, China is playing chess and the West is playing checkers. The good news is that we've seen this approach from China before with Huawei, where they undercut and infected the global marketplace with capabilities that advance Chinese strategic interests. We can recognize these symptoms and act differently. China's objectives are clear: to create a state-controlled global network that gives them the ability to exert control over not just their own citizens, but hold the free society at risk. This is unlike the U.S. leveraging commercial technology on contracts to modernize the military or intelligence collection. This is complete alignment of military and civil activities where the goals and purposes are the same. Evidence of this alignment is not elusive. For example, commercial space companies can be seen rolling spacecraft out of PLA-owned integration and test facilities. The strategy is developed at the various highest level of government and has several key thrust areas. The first is to capture key technology. Industrial theft at nation-state scale is obvious. The Chinese internet is replete with doppelganger images of Western satellites. Their theft includes hostile takeovers of European companies to boost their high-rate manufacturing. Second is to attain key footholds in the market. One of the key footholds in the satellite business is an ITU frequency allocation. China will even buy European companies like Clio Connect to get them. Third, subsidize industry to undercut the global market. China's approach to subsidies is creative, and it aligns all levels of government from national to municipal. The subsidies are in the billions of dollars and are resulting in a massive expansion that dwarfs commercial growth in the United States. Fourth, build manufacturing at massive scales. Enabled by these massive subsidies and lubricated by an incredibly permissive regulatory environment, Chinese space manufacturing capacity has matured at light speed. 26 high-rate satellite manufacturing facilities have been built in the past 3 years. 21 launch-related companies have been established in the past 3 years, with over 7 new launch complexes. Fifth, manipulate seams in the regulatory environment. There appears to be no concern by U.S. regulatory bodies that China's opaque ITU filings may present interference problems, and U.S. regulatory bodies have not raised concerns with how its regulations slow U.S. operators as compared to their Chinese or foreign counterparts. Once U.S. filings are made, competitors, generally ones that are licensed and often funded by foreign governments, are permitted to game the U.S. regulatory process to slow each other down, inserting objections that might give a particular company, even a Chinese company, an advantage. China also overwhelms ITU standards bodies that are consensus-based by rushing the field with massive numbers of personnel to dictate the agenda. When the agenda for future forums is set 4 years in advance, those disadvantages are massive. And lastly, expand into global markets. They will undercut the price to outpace Western expansion and offer additional incentives like funded schools and highways to sweeten the deal. The United States' greatest power is the innovation and speed of its industrial base. We need a series of reforms that leverage our strengths, create a level playing field, and give DoD greater access to that innovation and speed. First is regulatory reform. Both the FAA and the FCC need to institute serious regulatory reform to maximize industry competition while keeping prudent attention to safety of U.S. citizens and the environment. Regulatory reform should eliminate ambiguous requirements, repair overlap in agency authorities, and discontinue allowing the National Environmental Protection Act to be weaponized for parochial interests instead of truly protecting natural habitats and resources, specifically in the United States. Regulatory timeline improvements. Previous attempts to streamline regulations have only created increased reporting requirements that require even larger regulatory staffs and longer approval timelines. Reform should institute a shot clock, it's March Madness, that competes with China's, offering approval relief if the timelines aren't met. We should also align our approval processes with non-US licensees. Third, we need to engage in regulatory fare to build parity with China. Reform should strengthen and align Western regulations related to theft of technology, manipulation of markets, and exploitation of international forums. Fourth, we need to create more public-private partnerships that incentivize growth of space-related launch infrastructure, space technology, and manufacturing. Fifth, create more flexible contracting and acquisition options for the DoD. Consider FAR modifications like what is being proposed by the SASC and Forged. Look at expanding the use of service-type contracts to lease commercial space capabilities. And finally, consider creating a special budgeting provisions for DoD and IC efforts that minimally modify a commercially available service. Such structures may incentivize companies to develop commercially viable capabilities at their own risk, and also incentivize the DoD and the IC to avoid requirements creep in exchange for speed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all for your statements. We'll now move into the Q&A portion. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order, but since I have the mic and no one can stop me, I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair and go first. First question I have is for Mr. Curcio and maybe Mr. Cavossa as well, but anybody who has a view on this, I would love to hear it. Is U.S. investment in any way fueling China's private sector or commercial space growth?
As best I can tell, no, it's not. The closest thing that we would see to that is a couple of subsidiaries or no longer subsidiaries of U.S. venture capital funds. So for example, Sequoia China, I think Matrix Partners as well, their China branch, has invested in some of the very early stages of Chinese commercial space. So back in 2015, 2016, 2017. I don't know if there's any reason for this, but we have not seen those entities invest in any of the more recent, well, any of the last 5 or 6 years, as far as I can tell, but that would be the closest we've seen to that.
Sir, the only thing I can sort of point to is perhaps mimicry, if anything, where I haven't seen cases where U.S. is investing in China, but what we are noticing is that when something gets invested in here in the United States in space, in commercial space, it doesn't take too long to see similar investments made in similar Chinese technologies soon after that. So when they see progress here, it dictates some of the things they do.
Okay. For both of you as well, and others, if you have thoughts, how is IP theft impacting China's commercial space growth as well, or either on either side of the fence there, commercial or government side?
It's not something that I can speak intelligently about. Again, going back to my previous answer, sir, we just see a lot of things when the Chinese government announce it or when commercial entities in China announce new programs, new technologies, they look an awful lot like U.S. programs and U.S. technology. So there's an assumption I make, but I'm not privy to details.
Okay.
And sorry, I have one extra.
Sure, of course.
Something comes to mind. You know, often you see in Chinese media things like a couple weeks ago, there was an article where they tore apart a Starlink third generation terminal, and it was like they tore it all the way down to like the nuts and bolts. Some Chinese electrical engineer, and just layer after layer, and photos of really high definition photos of just here's the terminal not torn apart, here's the first layer, here's the second layer, and then analysis of how are they doing this, and how what might we need to be China need to be doing in order to build similar terminals. So you do see that with some regularity.
I'll just add to that. When I talked about doppelgangers, they are exact copies, right? The reaction wheels are all in the right spots. The phased array transmitters are all exactly the same. We see Starlink doppelgangers, we see Iridium, right? It's all across the board. And it's not just necessarily theft of a spacecraft design. Back in 2019, China bought KUKA Robotics, which was the premier German robotics firm that does automated assembly line and manufacturing. Now you see that KUKA Robotics firm all over China. They have 6 KUKA Robotics firms in China alone. And if you look at almost every satellite manufacturing building or rocket manufacturing building, you will see KUKA Robotics there. It's hard to believe that they didn't learn very quickly by buying that company how to build a high-rate manufacturing line for satellites. Thanks.
If I could just add.
Yeah,
I'd like
please.
to foot stomp the mimicry. We definitely see the mimicry down to the details of design, whether that's through, theft of intellectual property or not, I can't say. But another observation, and maybe it's a question for some of the other panelists like Blaine who have more expertise in the Chinese commercial sector. But in the US, we have commercial entities that provide whole space services to the Department of Defense. And not my area of expertise, but what I see from China is you have the large state-owned enterprises and their subsidiaries that provide the bulk of the space capabilities. Yes, some newer entrants in the commercial market that are active in launch and a few niche areas. But I wonder now if we're starting to see a change, if China's government wants to have it both ways. It wants to have the advantages of the state-owned enterprises, but if it also aspires to have the same kind of commercial sector that can innovate and that can provide, space services and not just contribute to the PLA on the margins. Over.
Mr. Cox, one of the things in your testimony that stuck out to me is you said something to the effect of that the United States' greatest power is our industrial strength in this space, which is something I feel like we don't hear very often right now when we're compared to China, that we have an industrial advantage over them. So I'd be curious, any more thoughts you may have on that in general, but specifically, what areas of our industrial base do you see that we are weak in, where we lack self-sufficiency in some of the important supply chains in the space industry?
Yeah, there's a lot to that question, so I'll try to unpack it in an organized way. But the first thing is, I would say, when it comes to our advantages, certainly the level of innovation is our greatest strength. And when the last subject we just talked about, it was how often they copy, right? We still innovate way faster than China. But that advantage can quickly erode once your adversary learns how to copy and copy at mass scale, right? So quantity will have a quality all its own. So if I can get as close to a capability on COM or ISR, remote sensing, but I can produce it way faster than you can, I'll take that seat, right? And so I think we have to jealously protect that advantage of our innovation and figure out more creative ways to both prevent its theft as well as to remove some of those impediments that we have to competing in the international market. I also think that we still have troubles as a former government employee of taking advantage of that innovation on the government side. You heard CSO talk about that as well, right? We have antiquated acquisition structures that are fossilized, that have taken on a lot of structure, and we need to strip some of that down so that we can take advantage of that innovation.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Commissioner Kuiken.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sims. First of all, great testimony from all 5 of you. Really appreciate you being here today. Ms. Samson, Mr. Cavossa, Mr. Cox, one of the things I sort of heard from all 3 of you was a discussion about the ITU and sort of international institutions. One of the questions I asked General Saltzman, although not as directly now that I sort of look back at it in hindsight, is, are these institutions up for the role that they were intended to play? And I think the answer is no. So then there's always this sort of political tension between whether or not we should stay with these institutions or abandon them outright. I think the answer here is we should stay with them and probably make them more robust. But I'm sure there's some tension there that you guys are much more familiar with, and I appreciate all three of you just sort of quickly giving views.
So if I understand your question properly, is whether the international institutions are able to have these conversations. Is that what you're asking?
I mean, we created the ITU to manage where satellites get parked, if my sort of knowledge of their mission is correct, right?
Right.
If China just decides to ignore them, like, are there ITU police that are going to fly up to space and readjust them? Like, obviously, I know the answer to that. But, like, it seems to me that this is an institution that was created some period of time ago that has largely played the role that it was originally intended to do. But sort of the game has changed. And maybe they haven't changed with it, and maybe there's ways that we should think about it. I think Mr. Cox or Mr. Cavossa mentioned something about a 4-year cycle that I didn't, that I'm sort of not familiar with. But, like, that's the question. Does that make sense, Ms. Sampson?
Yeah, so I mean, actually, the ITU, I would say, is more evolved than some of the other international institutions because it allows for member states, but also companies can be members as well. And so it's one of the few organizations, the multilateral fora that deal with space, that allow the commercial sector to be involved. So, and that's crucial because the commercial sector is a huge stakeholder in space, and they have a lot of effect on it. So I think actually it's important to keep part of that conversation. They do, basically, they have a work group that picks the topics, and they work it 4 years ahead of time. But the U.S. is actually very involved in that, too. So I don't know necessarily that the U.S. is getting steamrolled there, actually. I would not describe that as well. And the ITU is actually taking on newer topics. They're starting to focus on space sustainability, which is crucial because if you're talking about issues that are, complicating the space environment, it's not just orbital spots, but it's spectrum usage. And so the idea of trying to manage effective use of spectrum is really helpful. And in regards to the United Nations, I mean, that's one of the few places the United States and China can actually talk about a lot of these issues. China is a big participant in both the civil space and the security space conversations, given how important space security and stability is to the future of U.S. space, the future of our national security space establishment, how our economy functions. I think it's important to have these conversations in these fora, so I would not actually advise pulling back. Thank you.
I'm not advising pulling back either. I was just sort of curious to get you you guys are subject matter experts here, curious on sort of your views on the tension points and thinking about sort of revitalizing a place like ITU.
Yeah, I'll just add, sir, that the ITU and UN copious bodies are the best thing that we have, and our general feeling is that the United States government just needs to do a better job of advocating for U.S. interests in these bodies more aggressively.
I'd echo that statement. I think it's very tempting to talk about, well, should we just ignore it? But it really does. These bodies do add value. I think we have to look at, really, it's two aspects. One is, well, what about our U.S. regulatory environment? The things that we can change, right? That's where we really need significant reform. Because we don't, as it relates to SATCOM, we don't enter the ITU until we get through our own, I would call, laborious process. And that's where we lose the competitive edge. When China can go straight to the ITU without waiting, and we sit there in a backlog of years to get there, that's where the disadvantage starts. I think the ITU can be productive, but the United States has to look at it like a strategic environment where you can't sit on your heels and just sort of watch things happen or allow someone who comes with more people to vote takes advantage of you because you haven't thought about that strategically. So I think we just need to think about these bodies in a more strategic, again, whole of government activity where we are trying to make sure that we advantage U.S. industry and U.S. capability.
I heard you and Mr. Cavossa make the regulatory reform comment, and I sat on the Armed Services Committee and listened to everyone always talk about acquisition reform. And as you peel back the onion on acquisition reform, a lot of times it's sort of self-deterring within the executive branch, not necessarily something that the Congress has imposed on the executive branch. In the space of regulatory reform, are the backlogs because there's not enough people? Is because people don't want to make decisions? There's always something that is holding up a process, and often it's being under-resourced, or not under-resourced in terms of dollars, or in terms of technology, or in terms of people or other things. Are these just institutions that are sort of under-resourced, or is it something else there?
Yeah, I'll comment on behalf of industry to say that when we look at U.S. regulatory bodies, there's always there's always a benefit to saying we can throw a little bit more money at them, more resources, more people. But then, of course, those organizations, once they're larger, might decide to create even more process and more structure and more red tape. That's unfortunately human nature. We tend to see, sir, when we look at U.S. regulatory bodies broadly defined, whether that's the FCC, the FAA, Office of Space Commerce, is they have within their power today the ability to modernize their licensing system and cut red tape and move things along more quickly. They've created at times too much process, too much structure. They've at times read a rule in the most strict sense of the word rather than a way that they can lean a little bit more towards industry side. And those are the sort of interpretations we'd like to focus on.
Thanks.
If I could just add to that.
Next question's for you, Mr. Cox.
All right, I'll just be quiet then.
Your mention of, I think it's Cuckoo robots, right? Reminded me of the testimony we heard in our Made in China 2025 hearing from, I think it was Liza Tobin, who used to be with SCSP. She talked about this sort of gigantic investment in advanced manufacturing that China has made. You've sort of highlighted it in space. Is it as dramatic as it sounds? Has U.S. industry not made similar investments in terms of automation? Like I have actually visited most of the SpaceX facilities and have a fairly good sense of things, but like just be interested in you sort of giving some additional views there.
Again, I don't think the issue is necessarily an imbalance of industry making the right investments. I think industry does again, pretty good job of making the investments in the right places at the right times. It's why China copies us. The issue is that China copies us. If you were out on that SpaceX floor in Redmond, did you see what the robots were that were assembling? Those are KUKA robotics robots, right? So the fact that China bought that company, right? They learned decades of how to do high-rate satellite manufacturing by simply just doing it was a hostile takeover. They bought 95% of the company in one fell swoop at 50% over the stock price. And so with that one small investment, they recovered 10, 15 years of learning.
Mr. Cavossa, how much are American companies helping the Chinese space program?
I'm not aware today where we're helping directly the Chinese space program, other than through perhaps intellectual property theft and mimicry. I'm not aware of any place where we're helping the Chinese government today.
Thank you. I actually didn't realize I had a big red light, so I'll turn it back to Co-Chair Sims.
I just assumed you have utter contempt for the clock. That's what I said. Commissioner Stivers.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today and for your testimonies. Going back to international space governance frameworks, generally we're in the situation where the U.S. is withdrawing, rejecting, ignoring international agreements across the board, and cooperation with other countries generally. But you also have China's situation where they are taking advantage of the situation diplomatically, but also has a track record of ignoring international agreements whenever it believes it's not in their interest. So in this context, how can we most persuasively, and this is a question mostly for you, Ms. Samson, but please, anyone else to jump in, how can we more persuasively make the case for the Trump administration to continue to engage in these international agreements? Is there a way or a recommendation where the private sector can more take the lead on some of these agreements, more so than they've done in the past?
I mean, I think there's power to the U.S. government maintaining its connection with the previous administration's agreements. Something like the Artemis Accords, for example, which, as I said, is how the U.S. Interprets the Outer Space Treaty principles and wants to apply them to future peaceful exploration of space. That's a huge thing. We have 53 countries that have signed on to it. It's a declaration that this is how the U.S. views these sort of things and how we want to go moving forward. And a lot of countries like that vision. That's why there's so many more that have signed on to the Artemis Accords than have joined the International Lunar Research Station. If the U.S. decides to back out of it, I mean, that's not legally binding. It's just, a common understanding. But that sends a signal that the U.S. cannot be trusted. And that leaves, as I said before, that leaves an opening for China to reach in. China's got their space station now. I know they've volunteered to have other countries come and be astronauts on them. They're going to have that possibility after the International Space Station is gone, unless the U.S. is going to do something like that with its commercial space station, which I haven't heard anything like that. So I think it's a real concern. And then as well, China is using the opportunity to build outreach to other countries, using space as a soft power advantage and demonstrating that they can provide something. And if the U.S. is pulling back on funding internationally, that is leaving a huge gap for the Chinese to come in and do that. So again, I think that's just really short-sighted for the United States to be doing those sort of things. Talking to international partners, they're very worried about whether they can even depend upon the United States anymore, and that gives China the chance to show that they can be depended upon. Thank you.
Just to add from my side, potentially trying to bridge the information asymmetry gap. There's just since November of last year, for example, we've seen the Chinese version of Starlink, this space sail, Thousand Sails constellation. They've made an MOU with Telebras in Brazil. They made an MOU with Miasat in Malaysia. We've seen China agree to bring a Pakistani astronaut to the Chinese space station. We're seeing an acceleration. We've seen China, about a week after USAID was defunded, we saw a China aid ground station unveiled in Namibia at the the Chinese embassy in Windhoek. So, making some of that clearer to the current administration, saying, "Look, guys, this is not this is an accelerating trend that China's moving into not just usual suspect countries, but also some other countries that are a little bit more neutral, if not slightly pro-U.S. Brazil, Malaysia, for example. It's concerning, to say the least."
Thanks. Any others? So Ms. Samson, going back to you again, first of all, thank you for your testimony and your opposition, your persuasive opposition to scientific research cuts. It's just really unbelievably counterproductive vis-a-vis the U.S. and China's competition and our entire future. But I'd like to go into your first recommendation about the Wolf Amendment, which sets an approval process for U.S.-China cooperation on space. You say it should be, I would be supportive of the Wolf Amendment, but I'm open to be persuaded on revisions. It seems that simple dialogue between the U.S. and China could continue as long as it goes through an approval process through the FBI so that we're not sharing sensitive technology and the like. How should it be revised, and how can you make the case that bilateral cooperation between the U.S. and China would produce anything significant?
Thank you. So, you go back to why the Wolf Amendment was created in 2011. There was a couple things. There was concern about IP theft. There was concern about cyber attacks. There were concerns about China's human rights violations. And so they said, look, we're not going to prevent the United States from doing, actually, at that point, the U.S. was thinking about getting China on the International Space Station. And so they said, look, we're not going to prevent the United States from doing bilateral things with China. But basically it says, that White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, the National Space Council, NASA cannot do bilateral activities with their Chinese counterparts unless you said they've notified the FBI, they've notified Congress, they've ensured they're not working with the human rights violators, and they report, a certain time ahead of time. So it's not that it prevents it, but it provides, as I said, a speed bump. It slows it down. And then you look about it and you say, okay, well, what has actually happened? A lot of U.S. institutions are actually afraid to do anything with China because they're worried that that will affect their ability to have U.S. government funding or grants. So we lose out on the opportunity of this cross-technological building. Like, during the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union worked together, had scientific outreach so they could maintain a foundation of relationship that allowed for some understanding and communication that can help de-escalate things if they go possibly elsewhere. And then looking at what China's space program has done, we all know China's space program has gone tremendously. This has done nothing to slow it down. It basically, all it does is it sends a sign that the United States is finding difficulty in working with the other preeminent space power. I think a lot of people don't realize, Russia is a failing space power. Their civil space program is in tatters. They don't have a commercial space program. The military space is the only thing that they really have. And so really, the U.S. is cutting itself off by not being able to coordinate, at least. We have to be able to coordinate with the Chinese. We're both launching very large constellations. We don't have any way to communicate, really, about changing, when these satellites are changing positions. We're both looking at going to similar places on the moon. And that's going to be a concern in terms of lunar dust, in terms of making sure if there's any kind of interoperability for human safety, we need to be able to coordinate on these sort of things. And so I think there are missed out opportunities, both in terms of how we can strengthen the U.S. space infrastructure, but also it sends a diplomatic message that the Chinese use against us to justify why they don't have to cooperate with the United States at all. And again, we keep doing our adversaries' work for them. We hand them the language that they can use as a noose around our throats. One of the other things I'll do, I know I'm over, is that one of my recommendations was that we needed to stop referring to space as a warfighting domain. We can call it space as an operational domain. I think that makes total sense. By using space as a warfighting domain, again, we're doing our adversaries' work for them. We're saying, here's the language to portray the United States as the bad one, as the one that's weaponizing space. And then they use that in these international discussions that the United States needs to be able to make sure that we understand what responsible behavior is, to argue to other countries, to developing countries, that the United States is not acting in good faith and they shouldn't listen to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Commissioner Brien.
Thank you. Just on the same subject, Ms. Samson and anybody else who would be interested in answering this, it strikes me that the discussion we're having about engaging the PRC on space issues, it seems to parallel in some ways the discussions we have about engaging the PRC on a whole range of issues. So, military to military ties, where there would seem to be obvious benefits from a U.S. perspective in having these discussions. I'm curious, do we get a sense that there is a demand signal on the Chinese side for this? And is there any reason to be concerned that the PRC might take a different approach to this sort of engagement, whether as an intelligence fishing exercise or anything beyond sort of a good faith sharing of information and attempted deconfliction?
Again, if anybody else. So, China is part of these discussions at the United Nations and COPUOS. They've got a working group on lunar, on space resources that they've been part of, and they just started an action team on lunar coordination. And China is very much a part of that. And so they understand there's a need to be able to deconflict a lot of these sort of things. Their participation in these working groups indicate that they understand, governance has a role to play, and that they would like to be part of that, and they want to help shape that conversation. And so that's why I think it's really important for the U.S. to also participate, which we are right now, to continue to participate in these international discussions, because this is where the decisions are being made, and these are where the conversations are being had. If we want to make sure our interests are looked out for, we need to be part of these discussions about space resource use and things of that nature. So I don't know if necessarily if the Chinese have reached out about bilateral coordination. I think, again, they may not see it as, in the Wolf Amendment, that there's any point of doing so. But there have been bilateral discussions amongst, our DOD and Ministry of Defense and our State Department and their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there is some interest there. And I think, again, if you look at what they're planning for the International Lunar Research Station, they're looking at a lot of the similar things that we're trying to establish on the moon. And it makes sense. Their principles are very similar to the Artemis Accords principles because, again, they're working with the same, laws of physics. They're working with the same legal infrastructure started by the Outer Space Treaty. So they have similar interests. And I think, it'd be foolish of them not to want to coordinate with the United States because we are going to be the two lunar space powers. Thank you.
I just wanted to maybe push back slightly on the concept of stop referring to space as a warfighting domain. The importance of international cooperation and engaging the Chinese aside, that's all important. But let's remember that China also has defined space as a warfighting domain since 2015. And China's military leadership tends to exaggerate the capabilities that we have and how we might employ them. And I think we would have little chance in messaging to them otherwise. They will continue to see us as viewing space as a warfighting domain, even if we message to the contrary. Over.
I would second that view. Like, we can continue to splice our language, but it won't matter. I would also say, you asked a question specifically about military to military. I think our historical experience on that is it's inherently stabilizing if we can do it right. I think the challenge that you have, particularly on the space side with China, is making sure we make those connections at the right levels. And just as an example, when they blew up their own weather satellite that General Saltzman referenced in 2007, it wasn't abundantly clear that that was as well staffed as it would have been here in the United States. And so knowing where to plug in and who to talk to, who has the right balance of both strategic and national level policy, as well as the tactical implementation of that, is incredibly complex. And so getting it right is really important.
Just one more question. Ms. Samson, you mentioned Russian plans to put nuclear weapons in space during your testimony, and based on what I read, I understand there was some hope in the U.S. government at that time that that would create friction with the Chinese, who might weigh in and tell the Russians this was a bad idea. Just based on your understanding, is that a meaningful point of friction between Russia and China in the way that they view space?
I haven't seen any statements by Chinese government officials on this specifically. The only thing I can point to is, like I said, their votes in the UN and both the Security Council and in the General Assembly. It's my understanding, again, to be clear, Russia has never acknowledged that they are doing this. In fact, they've denied it. It's been U.S. intelligence that's come up and said that they understand Russia is developing the nuclear warhead with the intention of using it as an anti-satellite capacity from the EMP that would be released from a detonation. But it's also my understanding that when this was being first talked about, the U.S. did reach out to India and to China to say, "Can you talk to Russia?" Because that would, they would stand a lot to lose. And I'll point out, right now there's about 11,500 active satellites, of which the U.S. has about 8,000, roughly, maybe a little bit more than that. China has about 1,000. Russia has about 320. Russia has a lot. I mean, they lose stuff. They've got people up in the space station, but they have a lot less to lose, whereas China and India both have invested more. But again, nothing specifically that they've said about that.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Shriver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Appreciate your testimony. Learned a lot. I have a specific question or two and then a general question for the panel. Dr. Alkire, I might start with you and invite you to, if you'd like, to go into a little more detail on one of your recommendations. You said take a broader view, study dependencies, and try to exploit the vulnerabilities that China might have where they're dependent and mitigate risk where we're dependent. But you kept that at a pretty general level. Where might that lead us, and what are the types of things that you would expect would result in such an analysis and where you'd want to invest?
Certainly. I think the notion of striving for dominance or superiority is good, but it needs to be a very nuanced discussion, particularly if we talk about specific warfighting scenarios in the Indo-Pacific, the high-end scenarios that are priorities for our government. What are the dependencies and when during a conflict? And if you are going to strive for space superiority, what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to hold all of your adversaries' satellites at risk irreversibly, instantaneously? Is it ability to hold at risk flexibly through reversible means, or if necessary, through irreversible means? What is the timelines associated with that relative to what's happening in the broader joint warfight? So I think it's really important for us to understand, from a military perspective, how space is contributing to our broader joint or coalition warfight and China's, and understand what those dependencies are and when, and then use that much more detailed look to be able to prioritize. What are those investments in resilience that we need in the United States in order to have robust architectures to provide us the space capabilities we depend upon? Like, for example, position, navigation, and timing systems. What are some of China's key capabilities? I think General Saltzman had talked about their intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance as part of their kill chains, kill webs, kill meshes, what have you, in the Pacific. Our analysis kind of shows the same thing. I talked about China being the only country that has a synthetic aperture radar, satellite and geostationary orbit. There are other ISR satellites and other parts of the kill chain that integrate with that. And so understanding what are the key dependencies there for China and be able to hold those at risk if necessary. And it's not that we will necessarily deny, degrade, or attack those capabilities. Our hope is always for deterrence.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I do think demonstrating you hold something at risk is all about deterrence, not a desire to necessarily engage in that way. Speaking of engagement, so I wanted to pick up this point about potentially engaging bilaterally with the PRC. Having been in charge of the U.S. mill-to-mill relationship with China on a couple of different occasions, I think my enthusiasm is a bit in check on this, but I understand the points about they are engaging in international fora, they are the other major space power and an emerging one, I understand all that. So rather than try to litigate that with you, there were comments made about plugging in at the right place, the right people, and basically constructing the right conversation with the Chinese bilaterally. So if we could get the right Chinese official to come visit the United States and lead a bilateral dialogue, who would it be? Or, if that's too specific, what organization do we want to plug in? And what would the agenda be, at an initial meeting or a quick follow-on meeting after the introductions?
I can't speak to who exactly would be there, but I mean, I think we'd be looking for science, scientific research, looking at exchanging information about space weather, exchanging information about orbital data, exchanging information about, robotic space exploration, that sort of things. So probably the CNSA and whoever else conducts that sort of thing there. But I think just, accessing the tremendous amount of investment that they've made, I think would be strengthen the U.S. space system, and it would also be helpful from like a space traffic coordination circumstance to be able to share that kind of information. This is not secret information. One of the things that's always frustrated me for the U.S. National Security Space Establishment is it tries to classify the existence of objects in space. And, basically anyone with a telescope or even a good iPhone can identify objects in orbit. It's not a secret anymore. But it's helpful to have that kind of coordination so that you're not running into each other, So I think that's where I would focus on, starting at the basic level of doing scientific data exchange and information for spaceflight safety and allowing ways in which for the commercial operators to also share best practices that they've developed. And that'd be very helpful too.
Anybody else on that point? Anybody got an interlocutor in mind, or no?
Maybe just a couple of ideas. So I think the large non-geostationary communication constellation operators, so the SpaceSail come to mind, China Satellite Networks Limited would come to mind as well. These two companies are planning to launch thousands of satellites over the next few years. That's going to be important from space traffic management perspective. The company I mentioned during my testimony, so Charming Globe, CGSTL, they have a couple hundred satellites on orbit. They continue to launch a lot of satellites. And so again, they represent maybe 15, 20% of all Chinese satellites on orbit today. CASC, the large state-owned space conglomerate, I mean, they still represent most of China's launches today. So they're sending 60, 70 rockets into orbit per year, and that number will only go up as they start to do reusable rockets. So, those four entities, come to mind as, let's say, the most logical four in terms of just putting the most stuff up there into space. And at least two of them are nominally commercial companies, which may or may not make it a little bit easier from a Chinese side perspective, and also maybe from a U.S. perspective, to have those kind of dialogues.
Thank you. May I ask one final question?
Please do.
22 seconds. I was going to do rapid fire, but maybe we'll just, whoever wants to
No,
jump
take your time. I mean, once Kaiken just goes wild and just blows past the time, it's anything goes.
Well, I was gonna ask, let's say a miracle happened and Congress said, you can spend unlimited amount of money. Probably not gonna happen in this environment, but I'll give you unlimited amount of money, but you can only spend it on one thing. What would you spend it on?
At least you made it a good question.
Yeah. I mean, given some of the comments from General Saltzman earlier and our testimony, one of the big things we worry about on the industry side is lack of launch structure, infrastructure, and resiliency. We are very much single-threaded through 2 launch facilities today in the United States for the most part, and additional funding is needed to build up more spaceport infrastructure.
I'm going to cheat and give you 2. One is continue the track of acquiring resilient architectures. So you don't need new money if we just continue on that, so that's how I'm cheating. But I would say space domain awareness and command and control are becoming increasingly important for space operations, and those, at least near term, probably ought to be priority areas.
Yeah, from my side, I think it's a little bit cheating as well. It's a pretty broad category, but a broader variety of commercial contracts. One thing that worries me right now in the U.S. is that we are very much a space industry that is SpaceX and Starlink, and then everyone else is pretty far behind those two. And if we look at the Chinese commercial space industry, I mean, I always say, yeah, SpaceX is far ahead of the top Chinese commercial launch company. But if we look at the number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6 commercial launch companies, it's not so clear. And then if we look at, the number 40 commercial launch company, like there is no number 40 commercial launch company in the US. Maybe there doesn't need to be one, but there's a much broader and deeper commercial space sector in China than we realize. And I fear that that's going to be a problem when we only have like SpaceX and Starlink as our two far and ahead leading companies.
I agree with Brien about SSA and Blaine about needing to deepen the U.S. commercial sector. One of the things that really struck me when the Falcon 9 stopped working last summer is just basically U.S. launch stopped for a while. And, this is commercial, this is military, and there's ripple effects down the line. But if I were given the opportunity to say, okay, Congress is going to give us unlimited resources, financial resources, focus on active debris removal. The U.S., there's no U.S. entity in charge of that. The U.S. hasn't really done a lot of that. Even the Europeans and the Japanese have invested money in doing missions that look at this sort of thing. The Space Force has done just some nominal, very small contracts, and frankly, the optics of the U.S. military space organization doing that is not great, given the dual-use nature of active debris removal. But it needs to happen. It is essential to being able to continue to utilize space, and the U.S. government should be an anchor tenant at any kind of active debris removal stuff. Thank you.
I'm going to try to cheat more than anybody at this table. I don't know if that's a competition or not. So first off, I would say we're not going fast enough in building resilient architecture. So if we want more money, we got to put more money towards it. The only real architectures that we've made resilient by design are missile warning, missile tracking, our SATCOM architectures, and we're just now starting on GPS. There's a whole host of things that we haven't touched that still have that giving China the first mover advantage that the chief talked about earlier. You can't do that without fixing launch, right? You can't proliferate without fixing launch. The second thing I do is focus on how do I hold my adversary stuff at risk, right? The chief talked about that as well, right? We have very, very scant investments in offensive and defensive space control that can hold our adversaries' capabilities at risk. That's the second big investment, and you can't do that without SSA.
Thanks. I think I beat Kaiken in the longest Q&A for the day.
Next, our wonderful commission chair, Commissioner Price.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony today. This is so interesting. I wanted to start with Mr. Curcio, although you just began to answer the question. I wanted to, in response to Commissioner Shriver, I wanted to go back to your recommendations, which you put in your written testimony and but didn't get a chance to do in your spoken testimony. So the first question I was going to ask was for you to expand on the need for broader space industrial base, but you just did that. If you have anything else you want to add to that, that would be great. But I also want you to go back to your fourth recommendation about a more unified and better organized space strategy, what you would particularly see, and if you could talk about that for a moment.
Sure. So, well, thank you very much for reading the written testimony. Good to know that you do. I don't have much to add on the need for a broader space industrial base. I think that's really the idea is that, yeah, we need more than just SpaceX and Starlink. We can't just be reliant on these two companies controlled by one person. In terms of a more unified and better organized space strategy, I mean, my ignorance may be showing a little bit. I'm not so familiar with the U.S. strategy formulation process in general. I'm much more familiar with China, as it would turn out. But I see on the Chinese side a lot more national level strategies that then trickle down to provincial governments and city governments and district governments in many cases. And you can see the way that national priorities are almost used as like a signaling device, where as soon as the national government says something, a lot of different entities down the chain mobilize into action relatively quickly. And relating to what I mentioned earlier in my testimony, like this provincial government and the Chinese Academy of Sciences subsidizing and providing tech transfer to this remote sensing company, I mean, that's at least in part related to national government priorities around things like digital China, they call it, which is trying to build a 3D map of China using, you know, among other things, remote sensing satellite data. So the government saying we want to have this capability or this concept, Belt and Road being another example where they say we want to have more international collaboration, and that sort of acts as a signaling device for subnational governments and commercial companies and the state-owned enterprises to do these things. So maybe a better way of summarizing that point is just having a clearer process by which priorities made at a national government level are actually reflected in reality or in, again, states or cities or companies down the chain.
Thank you. Mr. Cavossa, the whole public-private partnership when it comes to space is just different than in what we've done in the past. Can you talk a bit about how your industry sees that partnership? What would be the perfect balance, where we need to work harder, but what you would see as the balance there?
Sure. I mean, we can talk about it in the form of a couple of different customers, right? So the U.S. Department of Defense has become very reliant on commercial industry for satellite communications and remote sensing, and entirely pretty much reliant for launch. So those are good case studies where the DoD, the U.S. Government Space Force, has said we're going to rely as heavily as practical on commercial and use firm fixed price contracts and competitively bid and milestone-based procurements. NASA, on the other side, on civil space, has moved out on that in a handful of areas as well, with things like commercial crew and commercial cargo contracts in the past. And they're looking at new procurements right now where they're looking at, okay, instead of building something bespoke, government only, on a cost-plus contract basis, let's look at firm fixed price. Let's look at milestones and competitive contracts. So we're trying to, just as an industry, get the entire federal government, U.S. government, to say, you don't have to build everything yourself, and that firm fixed price is a much better approach generally than cost-plus contract. When it comes to commercial industry, we can move faster, and we can provide generally, 90% of the solution for, I would say, 50% of the cost when we're doing this sort of public-private partnership approach. So does that answer your question, or did I miss it?
Yeah, I just, well, somewhat. Just as we try and find that right balance, that's the question. And there are pros and cons on both sides. And what are we missing when it becomes all government? What are we missing when it becomes all private? The Chinese have a very different model.
They do.
They can just sort of open the playing field in a very different way. So just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and I would argue that based on what we're seeing, the Chinese are doing both at the same time right now, right? They have their state-owned enterprises where they are very much supporting those entities, and they've encouraged a lot of commercial entities to try to build public-private partnerships in the country and outside the country. So they are moving forward in that, and I would say overall the U.S. is doing well in public-private partnerships, but of course we're biased as commercial space. We would like every procurement pretty much to be a commercial procurement.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just amplify it to say maybe we should be looking at how China does it, because they're very, very creative. And finding more opportunities like the Space Florida Commission, right, where there's a strong partnership between the state and industry to try to bring specific industries to the state, not that much different than how China does it provincially, that some of our panel members have talked about, right? So can we create opportunities where there's pockets of investment being made that align with a national strategic objective, but bring No, not that much different than China, where they have the G60 Starlink corridor, where they've focused on high-rate satellite manufacturing, right? How can we sort of mimic those operations to create centers of excellence across the country where we can draw talent, we can create industries, help work on infrastructure like launch pads and those kinds of things? I think we could do a lot more.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to add, there was some discussion about the importance of not going with a single source like SpaceX or Starlink for industrial-based reasons. But there's another thing, which is there are advantages to resilience in doing that. If you have, let's say, a communication terminal for a military platform that can not only talk to Starlink, but can talk to other commercial systems or military communication systems, that creates additional complexities for adversaries trying to degrade or deny that capability. So there's resilience benefits as well as industrial-based considerations.
All very helpful, thank you.
All right, to the man who continues to celebrate Liberation Day even the next day, Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. You've had excellent testimonies today. One of the things I've been very surprised by is that we spent a half a day talking about space, and I don't think we brought up the idea of critical minerals. If you go to the moon, there's a lot of critical minerals there. If we land on Mars, there's a lot of critical minerals there. I'm very interested in this issue on two different points. The first is, we land on the moon, we land on Mars. Are there treaties right now that even pretend to govern what we're allowed to hoover up, what we can call our own? I know there have been. How do we handle this right now? And I'm even more interested in the second part of this question, which is, half this discussion has been about how do we incentivize commercial firms to be involved in these public-private cooperations, cooperative endeavors. What are the pros and cons of allowing commercial firms to be involved in owning some of these critical minerals? Is this part of the debate right now? Is it something that's being pushed by industry? Is it a terrible idea? I'd love it if you could make us smart on one or both of these issues. And we can start with Mr. Cox, if you'd like, Mr. Cavossa, anyone who's interested in answering either of these questions.
I mean, I could just talk about the big picture. So the Outer Space Treaty doesn't really say anything about critical minerals or space resources, but Article 2 says you cannot appropriate the space or space celestial resources. And so there's been a debate internationally about what does that mean when it comes to space resource use. If you're not allowed to appropriate space, does that mean that can you use resources? The U.S.'s policy is that yes, you can. And a lot of our European colleagues have said no, you cannot. So there's been that dispute. The discussion of the United Nations Intercopos at the legal subcommittee, they've been taking up a space resource working group where they talk about these sort of things and trying to get a common understanding. And that's why something like the Artemis Accords has been so helpful, because basically it does have a carve out and talks about space resource use and that sort of thing. As well, the Chinese, I talked about this in my written testimony, the Chinese submitted a paper to the legal subcommittee last year talking about how they saw space resource use, and they're open to it. They're open to there being civil actions on the moon, and they said, the commercial sector, they're not against it. They just would like to have some discussions, again, a common understanding about what exactly entities are allowed. And then when your question about commercial sector, is any discussion about them being involved in this? Not necessarily, but I think that's part of the broader conversation about mission authorization. Under Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, nations are required to authorize and continually supervise the actions of their national actors. And so as we evolve our use of space and as the commercial sector is doing new things, one of the big things is they're trying to get mission authorization. I will point out a case where that was not happening, and that was actually pretty controversial. Last year, there was a U.S. commercial company, Astrobotic, was going to be going to the moon, and they were carrying a bunch of payloads with them. One of this included human remains, cremated remains, and they were going to dump it on the moon. There are some people that found that offensive. The moon is a sacred place to some cultures, and they said, we do not want human remains there. And they said, well, hey, why isn't anyone taking care of that? Why did the U.S. government allow that? And there's no one authorized to do those kind of payloads. Right now, they're working on mission authorization. NASA doesn't have anything to say on that as a commercial sector. And so, the question is, if you're going to be having commercial companies being involved in using the space resource use, getting mission authorization clarified, who's in charge of monitoring that sort of thing and authorizing that, that's going to be key to allowing that to work. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'll just add, sir, that critical resources, critical minerals, Moon, Mars, asteroids, these are all things that are very much, I think, in play. I think in our lifetime, we will see my member companies are very interested in this sort of thing. And it's sort of unsettled in international law, I think, on where folks stand on this. As Victoria said, in Europe, it's viewed one way. In the United States, it's viewed another. But during our lifetime, we will be seeing robots or landers on the moon, on Mars, and other places, either using it for in situ resource utilization, or with the hope, I'm sure, of bringing it back. And it's something that we all should be very focused on. If we don't do it, China will inevitably head down that path.
So could I say it's the consensus judgment of many of you, if not all of you, that commercial firms being incentivized by getting some sort of share of these mineral deposits is something that's advisable, or is it deserving of more consideration? Trying to get an idea of this, and not just where things are going, but where things should be going.
I think where it should be going, yes.
Okay. All right. Let me move on to the next one then. Next question. General Saltzman, we had asked him earlier about quantum communications, because it was one area in which the United States seems to be lagging behind the Chinese. With all this talk of public-private cooperation, is there something we could do to supercharge this cooperation in the United States in order to get back on track to compete with the Chinese on quantum satellites?
I'll take a little bit of that. Not an expert necessarily in quantum technologies, but as you're aware, sir, there are many different kinds of quantum technologies: quantum computing, quantum sensing, quantum communication. I'm not aware of anything that is preventing the U.S. from being competitive in that if it is a priority. My understanding is that, at least from a Department of Defense perspective, some of the other quantum technology areas have tended to be higher priority: quantum sensing, and followed by probably quantum computing. So, could we compete well if there was interest in it? I have no reason to think we couldn't.
Any ideas on particular ways of doing it? Or, all right, we'll continue to noodle on that.
We need a clear application. I understand what benefits that quantum communication brings. The inability to eavesdrop without it being detected and the link being broken, et cetera. I'm also aware that there are significant challenges with it. In order to do it over very long ranges, you need quantum repeater capabilities. Otherwise, you have to rely upon classic computing, and that sort of breaks the benefits, if you will. It creates nodes that an adversary will go after with cyber means, as an example. So there's still challenges that China and anyone else doing work in this area face. Not that they won't eventually overcome it. But I think there has to be a clear application for it to drive the development.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Freeberg.
Thank you very much, and thanks for our witnesses. Really excellent and informative testimony. Mr. Curcio, I wanted to start with you. It sounds like you're describing sort of space industrial policy, which in many ways seems to resemble China's industrial policies in other domains. So you let 1,000 flowers bloom, let a whole bunch of companies emerge, let them sort of fight it out and compete among themselves, and then the winners emerge from that process. But I wonder, in this case, what is it exactly that's going to determine who the winners are? What makes the market? Because if it's electric vehicles, presumably it's millions of Chinese customers or potentially international customers. In this case, who's on the other side of this equation?
Thank you for your question. So I think the emergence of the broader commercial space industrial base is leading to chances to create winners and losers, as it were. So for example, which launch companies out of the 40 or 50 might become the winners? The ones that are I guess, winning contracts with the growing number of commercial satellite manufacturers that are typically funded by certain, provincial governments, as we talked about earlier, but and then who are doing, successful launches. So we've seen Galactic Energy is certainly the most well-established commercial launch company. They've sent maybe 18, 19 rockets into orbit, carrying something like 75, 80 satellites, and they've found a decent handful of customers that are varying flavors of commercial, and that's the same applies if you're a satellite operator, for example. You have satellite operators that have been able to bring solutions to typically provincial governments, city governments, let's say. So remote sensing, to take an example. You've had remote sensing companies making contracts with provincial forestry bureaus or provincial agriculture bureaus to actually use their remote sensing data for various real-world applications. And I think it's happened in steps because I think there's a certain level of hesitance by provincial governments to give contracts to companies that are not proven. There's a certain chicken and egg element, but again, you've had a lot of high-level support, a lot of financial support, a lot of technology transfer, and that type of support that is all feeding into these companies that are step by step starting to actually develop real-world capabilities. So I think if we compare now to, say, 7 or 8 years ago, there's a much more well-developed market, for lack of a better term, for some of these companies to actually show off and sell and prove their services. And that process has started to lead to winners and losers. So it's been a little bit of an organic process, but obviously with a whole lot of government and other financial support.
So all of the customers in your story are Chinese, is that right?
The vast majority, yes, but there have been a limited number of international customers that have launched satellites on some of these rockets. So Oman, for example, recently launched a satellite China recently launched a satellite for Oman, I should say, and there was a Chinese commercial company involved in the manufacturing of that satellite. But yes, in general, the overwhelming majority of the demand right now is coming from China.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cox, in your really interesting discussion of this explosive development of China's space industrial base, I think in your testimony, you draw a parallel to the Huawei story. And I wanted to ask, how do you think about the implications down the line of China's development of a massive global internet space-based network? Is this going to be a space-based equivalent of 5G, where China is going to provide connectivity for maybe primarily for countries in the developing world, and is therefore going to have the potential ability to surveil, to monitor communications, maybe to interrupt those under some circumstances?
That's exactly what I'm implying. I don't know that I could have said it any better. I think I would also add that the parallels with Huawei are amazing, but they actually extend a little bit, right? Because in this particular case, as you probably recall, we had to work with our Western partners to say, hey, you may not want some of that infrastructure in your national networks because it's got a back door, right? So we had to kind of pluck it out. The difference with space is it's really hard to pluck it out, right? I mean, they're transmitting inside our boundaries. As we extend this space internet to things like direct-to-device, right? Like where I'm communicating via, S-band to one of these things, right? Now the network is inside the fence lines. And so if we don't consider that serious, we really should. Now, that's not to say that it shouldn't exist, but if we're not paying attention to it and we're not realizing that this is really about a strategic competition to enable access and enable access freely, then we're missing the boat.
Do you have any estimate of what the additional coverage would be? So there's some portion of, let's say, the developing world where people do have access to internet presently via the terrestrial means. How many more people are going to be added potentially by these space-based networks? Is it 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion? What's the impact of this?
Yeah, it's certainly in the billions, right? The ability to provide, 200 plus megabits per second down to anywhere on the Earth, that is a huge and a necessary, improvement in the lives of the global population. So having that ability to do it with thousands of satellites, that's really where the competition begins.
Last quick question. How many U.S. or Western competitors are there who are working towards providing some kind of similar service?
I'll let you answer that.
Sure, I mean, I can think off the top of my head of 5 or 6 companies today launching satellites into low Earth orbit that would rival that system. And then in addition to that, sir, there are dozens of satellite communications providers in geostationary orbit that are already in the hundreds of satellites that cover the whole, Earth multiple times over. So there are many U.S. and European and Western providers today to compete.
Thank you.
Thank you all. In closing, thank you again to all our witnesses for their excellent testimonies today. You can find those testimonies as well as a recording of the hearing on our website. I'd like to note that the Commission's next hearing will focus on China's domestic energy challenges and China's growing impact on global energy markets. And with that, we are adjourned.